Good morning and welcome to this virtual Planning and Development Management Committee for the 24th of August 2021. As you can see, unfortunately the convener is unable to be with us this morning, so I will be sitting in for her as convener of this meeting. So I have apologies from Councillors McCall and Councillor McEwen, and I understand Councillor Purvis is substituting for Councillor McCall this morning, so welcome Councillor Purvis. Mr. Williams, do we have any other apologies?
Yes, Vice Convener. I believe we actually have an apology from Councillor Williamson as well.
And do we have any other substitutes that I don't know of?
No, just Councillor Purvis substitute Councillor McCall.
Fine. Thank you very much indeed. So without further ado, I will introduce the virtual top table. One day perhaps we'll be back to the actual table. We have Mr. Christian Smith, Development Management and Building Service Standards Manager. Mr. Jamie Scott, Team Leader, Mrs. Anne Condliffe, Team Leader, Mr. Colin Elliott this morning as our Legal Advisor and Solicitor, and Mr. Danny Williams from Committee Services. Members are reminded, of course, that we are on a virtual meeting, and as such, you must be with us all the time to be able to vote on any item in the meeting. If you have to leave for any reason, then you will be unable to vote. Unfortunately, this also means that if a member loses their internet connection during consideration of an item, they should not vote on that item. And please advise the clerk if you have to leave the meeting in the chat. For the proceeding today, can I remind councillors and officers to use the chat box to attract my attention? I'm unable to have a visual of everyone attending the meeting on my screen at the one time, and this is the only way we can ensure that everyone has their chance to ask a question or have their say for a comment. I'm now going to ask Mr. Williams if you could do a roll call to see who's here.
Yes, no problem, Vice Convener, and good morning, everyone. So as usual, just when I call your name, you can let me know whether you're present. So, Councillor Barnacle?
Present.
Vice Convener, I've heard from yourself. Councillor Brock?
Present.
Councillor Gray?
Present.
Councillor Illingworth?
Present.
Councillor James?
Good morning, Danny. Present.
Morning. Apologies, Councillor McCall, Councillor McEwen. Councillor Reid?
Present.
Councillor Simpson?
Present.
Councillor Waters?
Present.
Councillor Wilson?
Present.
And Councillor Purvis?
Present.
So that should be everyone who should be in attendance is here.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, well, next item on the agenda is any declarations of interest. So I can ask any members who have an interest to put DI in the chat box, and I'll hold back for a few seconds. Councillor James, you've put a DI in there.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, for item 5.1.2, which is the 248 dwelling houses at our Alma Valley. I've noticed that Vector Aerospace have raised an objection. Although I don't work for Vector Aerospace, I work for Boeing, which has an office within there. However, I feel it's a non-financial, non-pecuniary interest, just for information.
Thank you for that, Councillor. We'll now move on to deputations. Now, we have deputations this morning for items 511, 512 and 513. Members, I would remind you... sorry,
Sorry,
yes.
Colin Elliott here, legal. I'm sorry to interrupt, but could we clarify with Councillor James if he's declaring an interest on 512, which is Alma Valley Village and the houses, is he also declaring an interest on the related application, which is the roads application for the link road going through the site?
Commander, I declared a non-financial, non-pecuniary interest only as a matter of fact that the company that I do work for has an office within Vector Aerospace who have raised an objection. But I don't feel that my taking part in this decision making today has any bearing on what Vector Aerospace think. I'm also actually this is also in my council ward as well, so I feel I would like to take part, and I don't feel that the objection. I'm only doing it for so that people can see it, you know, for transparency. That's the only reason.
Just to clarify, you're not declaring an interest in stepping aside on either application.
No.
You are simply indicating that there is a connection there, but it's not sufficient to step out.
Absolutely.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Elliott. So remember, sorry, we're looking at our deputations. As I said, we have deputations for 511, 512 and 513. Before I ask if we're happy to hear them, may I just remind everybody we are now working under new standing orders, which came to effect on the 16th of August. And that effectively means now that each deputation has up to 10 minutes to make their deputation now, each one, rather than the original 5. But apart from that, that's it. And that obviously they have their deputation individually. Members, are we happy to hear deputations this morning?
Agreed.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, last part of housekeeping. Are we happy to accept the minutes of the last meeting on the 28th of July 2021? Are we agreed on those, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Fine. Marvellous. Thank you very much indeed. So, without further ado, we'll now move on to the agenda of the day. So, we're now looking at paper 511, and this is the formation of a primary vehicle access and associated works, approval of matters specified in conditions of planning application 15-01157, or as subsequently superseded by application 21/00383. And I'll ask Mr. Smith to introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My telephone just ran at the very inopportune moment there, so I was just closing that off and putting it on mute. It was a good reminder there, actually. So thank you. I'll initially actually give you a brief introduction to the application before a visual presentation. So this application sets out the details associated to the formation of the primary north-south transport route through the overall Alma Valley Village development site. This comprises a continuous vehicular route from the Bertha Park or Ruthven Field roundabout at Inveralmond, navigating down through Alma Valley to the A85. Thereafter, a new roundabout will be formed through a later development phase, but details of that roundabout are not part of this application. Beyond the formation of that primary access route, which would likely be delivered in at least 2 stages, no wider development such as housing is proposed by this application. So I'll now take you through a series of slides that set the scene of that proposed road. So first here, we see an image which identifies in red the overall extent of the recent planning permission in principle application for Alma Valley Village, which was at a recent committee. And this committee was minded to approve that application subject to a legal agreement, and that process is still to be completed. Key locations are identified for orientation purposes here. You'll see Alma Bank, Hunting Tower, Ruthven Field, and also Inveralmond Industrial Estate, and also Ruthven Field Road marked up there alongside the A85 along the southern part and the A9 further to the east. Next, here we can see the overview of the Alma Valley Village phasing, which is currently proposed. The phases identified are in themselves large development parcels with further sub-phases within them. At this point, overall proposals have only been submitted for phases 1 and 1A, the pink and purple areas adjacent to Ruthven Field roundabout. These are subject to the planning application covered by the next item on the agenda. Next slide, we now move to the proposed road being more clearly identified, starting in the northeast at Ruthven Field roundabout and moving down to the south, meeting eventually close to the roundabout on the A85. So this slide sees the route dissected into 2 parts, with part 1 proposed to be delivered in association with the development proposed in planning application 19/01433/AMM, which is, as I say, the next item on this agenda. Next slide. Now we move to photographs showing the situation on the ground, and this first image is taken looking directly west off the Ruthven Field roundabout, the starting point of that primary route. And if you actually note, the electricity mast, their pylons, and the far distance centre of the slide. You'll see that in the next slide. We then move to a view along the A85 towards the exit point of the primary road, looking east with the Almond Bank service station in the foreground and beyond the existing Castlebrae junction to the far left. The primary route subject of the application will connect to a new developer-funded A85 roundabout just beyond the service station. Next slide. We now return to the slide that shows the route and phasing of the primary road, but also showing the A85 roundabout at the bottom. Just to clarify there, actually, I mentioned that pylon, that will be visible in the next presentation in relation to the housing development, not the next slide, if I caused any confusion there. Apologies. So thank you, Vice Convener. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We'll now move to our first deputation of the day. I hope we have Miss May Smith on the telephone. Are you there, Miss Smith? Hello.
I don't believe we have Ms. Smith on the telephone, Vice Convener.
Right.
Looking at the committee services comment in the chat there, that we've not had any communication from Ms. Smith, but we do have the agent for the application, Mr. Alistair Wood from Savills.
Fine. Okay, then we'll move on to, in that instance, we'll move on to Mr. Wood. Mr. Wood, are you there? Can you hear me, Mr. Wood?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm speaking.
Yeah, you can. Sorry. Yeah,
hang on
a second, Mr. Wood. Hold on. Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, that's fine. Now, Mr. Wood, you'll have up to 10 minutes to make a deputation to the committee. My colleague will time you. He will interrupt you at the 9-minute mark if you get to that point, to warn you have 1 minute left to speak. Once you're finished, if I may ask you, hold on for the committee. They may have questions for you. So if you're happy to proceed, Mr. Wood, it's over to you.
Very happy. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm speaking today on behalf of the applicants Alma Valley Limited and Stuart Mcadam Limited. This AMSC application follows on from the committee's recent minded grant approval at the end of June of changes to reprioritise the main access to the Alma Valley site to the north from the Bertha Park or Ruffin Field roundabout, as it's always often known. As part of the delivery of the overall development, there's a requirement to demonstrate how the site will be accessed before considering the first detailed phase of housing development, which is the next item on your agenda today. With that in mind, this road infrastructure application will be delivered in 2 phases. The first phase, as you've seen from the presentation, will be from the Bertha Park or Ruffin Field roundabout up to the north side of the Lade to serve the first phase of housing. The second phase will cross the Lade and then link up with the new roundabout on the 85. That will only be delivered once further AMSC applications are approved for the second and subsequent phases of development at a later date. The road infrastructure has therefore been designed to minimise the impact of the development upon existing residents by providing new dedicated access to the development as it comes forward. In discussion with your officers, your highways officers and Transport Scotland, the first phase of the road infrastructure has been deliberately stopped short of the Lade to effectively limit the amount of traffic which could access the existing road network. The desire line for the vast majority of vehicle trips is to the east into Perth and north-south on the A9 by the relatively newly built Western Link Road and A85 A9 junction, which was designed by the council to accommodate the LBT housing allocations at Almond Valley and Bertha Park. This AMSC road infrastructure application has been the subject of detailed discussion with your highways officers and Transport Scotland. There are no objections from any of the regulatory stakeholders, and we therefore trust you will be able to endorse your officer's recommendation to approve this application today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. As I say, if you wouldn't mind holding on for a moment, we'll open up for questions from the committee. I have one already. Councillor James, you have a question.
Thanks again, convener. Mr. Wood, thanks for your presentation. As one of the ward councillors, I'm delighted to see you actually starting at the environment end rather than the A85 end. I have a question regarding the road which seems to connect with Bleachers Way. We've been told, or the residents were told, that this will be for only for emergency vehicle access for the time being. Do you have any plans to put collapsible bollards, because we can see that becoming a problem with traffic trying to get in and out of that site?
Given the scale of the first phase of development is for 340 houses, that access through Bleachers Way will connect into the wider development. There's a requirement to have two means of access in case of any accidents or fires to allow emergency vehicles to access the full site. However, as I stated in my presentation, the vast majority of vehicle trips will be to the east into Perth and north-south on the A9. And indeed, it's more likely that traffic from Bleachers Way will use the new access which will be provided not via the main infrastructure applicant, this AMSC, but through the subsequent AMSC application for the detailed design through the principal access route through the first phase to access the Bertha Park or Ruffenfield roundabouts, and it will give them greater access into Perth and north-south on the A9. So over 70% of the traffic from the first phase of development will access it via the Bertha Park or Ruffenfield roundabout. So there'll be very limited amounts of traffic, less than 40 vehicles per hour accessing any of the other road network or the existing road network. So I hope that answers your question.
Can I follow up, convener, please?
Please do, yes.
Yeah, it sort of does, but it also worries me slightly in the fact that this would potentially lead out into Millbrae, which again is a bit of voice for concern, because we're being told that traffic's limited on Castlebrae. We're hoping that the map, which we've seen, includes Castlebrae all the way around in a loop on the A85. However, locally, part of it at the Bleachers Way end is known as Millbrae, and is used quite regularly by pedestrians going to the school at Ruffenfield. So just worried about construction traffic going down Millbrae to get in through the Bleachers Way end. Is that something you thought of?
Yes, of course we have. So as part of the previous minded to grant approval, condition 23 of that planning permission in principle states that there should be no construction traffic on Castlebrae East. The infrastructure will stop short, or the new road will stop short at the north side, on the north bank, if you like, of the lade, and therefore not be possible for construction traffic to access the site. There'll obviously be clear signage directing construction traffic via the Bertha Park or Ruffenfield roundabout, as it's also known, into the development sites. So no construction traffic will be accessing the site via any other route other than that. So we're fortunate that route is now in place, and that was the reason why we submitted the planning permission and principal application that was minded to grant at the meeting on the 29th of June to ensure that all traffic from the first phase accesses the site from the Bertha Park or Ruffenfield roundabouts, and thereby minimising the impact on the existing residents, which might have been different from the previous approved scheme, which was to access the development from the south by a new roundabout in the 85 for the first phase. So the strategy has changed, given that the council has delivered that new Bertha Park Ruffenfield roundabout and the associated A985 junction, which was specifically designed to accommodate the LBT allocations at Alma Valley and Bertha Park.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your comprehensive answer, Mr. Wood. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got here suddenly appeared a question from Councillor Wilson. Is that for deputation or for officers?
Thanks, convener. It was originally for Mr. Smith, but since Mr. Wood's here, can I ask my question of him, please?
Certainly, certainly.
I'm on page 6 of our papers, and paragraph 6. Mr. Wood, good morning. I'm just wanting to clarify that this application covers the first 300 up to the first 340 dwellings. Is that correct? That's in phases 1A and 1B.
Mr. Wilson, Councillor Wilson, I would direct you to the next AMFC application on the agenda, which is for the detailed design and layout of the first phases of the first phase of homes at Alma Valley. This application is for the road infrastructure, which is required to be approved to demonstrate how the overall scheme will be accessed in advance of the details of the first phase, which is the next item on the agenda. So I trust
right,
that.
Mr. Wood, I understand the process, but this is the road that will allow the houses to get access to the Bertha Park roundabout.
Correct.
Yep, yeah. And this will avoid the current zigzag old road pattern that exists at the moment entirely. Is that correct?
Correct. There will still be accesses from the development. Obviously, we don't want the development not to be connected to the wider area. Yeah. However, the primary access, which you've seen in the picture there that Mr. Smith put up, is already built, and the stub on the roundabout is there to deliver that access into the site from the north, which is the whole reason we've changed the delivery strategy, which originally was from the south to the north, to accessing the site from the Bertha Park or Russellfield roundabout at the northern side of Alma Valley.
And then that road will service these 340
Absolutely,
dwellings?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's what I'm just trying to clarify in my own mind. And this is the first of several phases. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ingworth, your question seems to be answered, so I'll go on to Councillor Gray. Your question, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Straightforward question following the previous. What method will be taken to police access from the A85 and make sure that construction vehicles, which can include small vans, etc., do not attempt to gain access via the two braes off the A85?
Well, there are obviously proposed signage into the site and a clear construction route into the site, which will be passed to all contractors. In terms of policing actual use of the road, at the moment you'll be aware that there is a weak bridge across the Lade which has signage on it. Whilst one can't absolutely prevent people using roads as they're not intended to do, there'll be clear instructions given to all contractors to access the road from the A985 junction, and also that's clearly the principal access north-south and from the east to the site, where the vast majority of construction traffic will be coming from. It's not expected there will be a significant amount of traffic coming east along the 85 from the direction of the Crieff and Methven. So therefore, in terms of policing, it will have to be self-policing, as all traffic regulation orders are, albeit that there will be clear instructions to all parties to use the specified routes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no more questions coming through at the moment, Mr. Wood. So, and I know you're going to be speaking on the next application. So for the time being, thank you very much, and we'll speak again shortly. Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, members, we're now open up for questions for officers. Do we have any questions for officers, please? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I should just like perhaps some reassurance and clarification on page 21, paragraph 4, subsection O. I wonder if we can get some idea on how this enforcement will differ from present enforcement. given that a lot of the issues relating to the traffic, the HGV traffic particularly, may occur out with the actual planning site, but caused by work that's happening within the site. So perhaps we could see if we can get a bit more information about that particular paragraph on page 21.
Mr. Smith, would you like to come in on that? Or
Well,
Mr. Salmon?
Yes, thank you, Convener. In answer to your question, thank you, Councillor Simpson. If you read condition 4, which I think you're referring to in the round as an entity, there will be a document that will set out various parameters and measures associated to how construction traffic will be managed. So that will be a plan that will set that out. There will be no difference to how we will enforce any condition to how we will undertake any other enforcement or investigations associated. That would be in line with our enforcement. Goodness, I've lost my mind there. The enforcement charter that we have published on the website. So we will undertake any investigations associated to that in line with our charter.
Could I just have a very quick follow-up to that, Vice Convener?
Certainly, Councillor.
It is absolutely clear that if, shall we say, there are queues of HGV vehicles early in the morning affecting the amenity of residents of the area out with the site, that will be covered by the enforcement charter.
Well, the management plan should set out how they are going to deal with arrangements coming in. And we could go back to them saying, look, there are concerns over excessive amounts. So I don't know, are you talking about a massive convoy sitting and blocking out a street, or I'm not quite sure what you're meaning.
I'm very conscious not to discuss any other planning issues that I may have elsewhere, but I'm just wondering if sometimes the problems with HGV vehicles and other construction vehicles occur out with the site, and it has been my experience that we are limited in our powers of what we can do to, in effect, make them behave.
Yeah, perhaps what you're getting at is if a vehicle is licensed, taxed, etc., then it has the right to use the road. So if it's out with the site, then it is limited as to what we can do. However, we would expect through the construction management plan that there was management of vehicles such that significant amounts of traffic were not concertinaed into inappropriate times. But if you look at condition 4C, that sets out a code of conduct that relates to HGV drivers, and that would form part of the construction traffic management plan. But yes, you're probably quite right that look, we couldn't go out to someone and say, you're using the road and we don't like that because there's a planning condition. Well, they may say, well, I have the right to use this road because I am taxed and licensed. However, through this planning condition, we would expect that that was mitigated through management.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor James.
Thanks again, Convener. And you're okay, Mr. Smith. I lost my mind years ago as well. It was just really a point of clarity, which I sort of aspired to with Mr. Wood, with Castlebrae. I noticed on the maps that we've got in our papers, Castlebrae is at both junctions to the A85. However, locally, and Mr. Wood referred to only the east Castlebrae entrance. The west side is known locally as Millbrae. Is the traffic being restricted at Millbrae as well, or have you assumed that it's Castlebrae all the way around?
Might be Mr. Salmon for this one. Yes, he wants to answer. Mr. Salmon.
Good morning, committee. Can you hear me?
Can.
Good. In terms of the traffic assignment, the Castlebrae is essentially the whole loop. So in terms of, I'm assuming, I'll cover construction traffic. Both Perth and North Council and Transport Scotland are not supportive of these routes being used as construction traffic. Transport Scotland have concern regarding the junctions onto the A85, and PKC have concerns over the existing road infrastructure to accommodate the movements. In terms of traffic generation, we have considered both, and perhaps can discuss that in more detail with the next application. But it does cover and focuses more specifically on what is locally known as Millbrae, but is referred to as Castlebrae.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, your question.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I'm just going back to, I think, a basic understanding. I'm looking at the map here, which is fairly small scale, but I think, just to Mr. Smith, that the purple bit and the blob at the end is what the route of this section of road would be. Is that correct?
Yeah, the purple bit is the first section that would be delivered. The application covers almost the entirety of that route up to, but excluding the roundabout on the A85.
And
so
thank
what,
you. And
what
that,
we're showing here is the difference between the first part to be delivered, which I think, as you were mentioning, is required to provide access to the development proposed in the next application on the agenda.
and that section stops at the bridge or the crossing over the Lade.
Yes, and to an extent, yes, and then there is an existing road infrastructure beyond that.
Yeah, but there will be different sections of the new road, and part of that in the plan says part 2. And am I right in thinking that the new roundabout on the A85, I think you said it's just east of the current filling station, Mr. Smith, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. I appreciate that the plan to get everything in and give a bit of context is of a scale that's maybe not showing the detail at every point. But yeah, if you look at the orange marked limb that comes out to the right, the filling station is just at the end of that, if that gives you an idea of where it is.
Okay, I do have a handy magnifying glass for these occasions, Mr. Smith, which has now proved useful. And we don't know, I mean, this is phase 1. For the 340 dwellings, I think there will be other phases, but we don't have a time plan for these. It'll be up to the developers to come forward with separate applications for the separate phases. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, we have an indicative time period, but how accurate that would be will depend on market conditions. But yes, beyond the 340 units that will be dealt with through the next application, subsequent applications of a similar type will be required for any development beyond that point, yes.
And I'm sorry, maybe could have picked this up from papers, but do we have an indicative time for that roundabout on the A85 eventually?
Well, yeah, that roundabout will need to be delivered and the access as shown there completed to facilitate any more than the 340 units, which was dealt with through that previous application that was with us in July and is still to be concluded. But perhaps Mr. Salmon can maybe give you a bit more detail on that.
Just to clarify, the condition placed on the previous section 42 in June is for delivery of the new roundabout on the 85 and what is generally shown as part 2 by the 403rd unit of the site, just to confirm that.
Okay, so
yes,
the concern.
Thank you.
Thank you for that information, both of you. So the concerns that Councillor James and Councillor Simpson have raised should be, in terms of part 1, we're relying on the conditions we've got in to control the site traffic and ordinary residence traffic. But after that, then for part 2, the road and the roundabout need to be completed, which will help obviate some of the traffic circulation concerns. I said help obviate, not reduce or not eliminate, but some of the traffic concerns that 2 councillors had already iterated just a wee while ago. Is that, am I correct in thinking that?
That is the intention, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. That's clarified it in my mind. Thank
you very much. Councillor Barnacle, you have a question.
Yeah, it's really for Christian, possibly a daft laddie question, but in the summary, it says the development is acknowledged to not fully comply with the development plan, but I can't see through the report where that is obvious. Perhaps that could be explained to me.
Well, again, for developments of this scale, it is often the case that not every policy requirement is fully complied with, given the nature of development and the variances that can happen. But if you also remember back to the planning permission in principle, the development plan in itself was quite specific in terms of some of its requirements, both related to area covered, number of units that were included within the allocation, where access was to be taken from, etc., etc. So if we refer back to that planning permission in principle application under section 42 that was with us in June, that set out all that context. So there's a number of areas where it's not compliant with the development plan, but we are comfortable that those details are not materially significant.
That's fine. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, you have a question now.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just looking for a bit of basic clarification on the wider road network and what's going to happen. When you're coming along the 85 and you kind of cut up the existing road up to Ibermoore and also the road on the other side heading onto the site area, is in the future, once we get to the stage where the roundabout's going to be installed, are these sections of roads going to be blocked off? Are they going to go off, not be in use anymore within the road network?
I think that's Mr. Salmon to answer.
I'll defer that to Mr. Salmon. He's perhaps best placed to give you an accurate answer.
Yeah, happy to answer. As part of the previous section 42 in June, there is a condition which is in line with the in-principle permission that existing bit of road which forms a junction onto A85 is to be what we call stopped up, so it is to be closed. So there will be no through route for traffic onto what is sort of known as the Ibermoore Crossroads. That is to ensure that traffic will need to utilise the new roundabout provided on the A85.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any further questions coming through, but we'll just hold for a second just in case, but there aren't any, I don't think. So members, would anyone like to put a motion forward, please? And no one is. So members, I will move the paper as is. This is an important vehicular access for the development of the Alma Valley project. The access will be developed in two parts, of which we're looking now at part 1, which will allow access and development of phases 1 and 1A, which we will discuss later in another paper. It makes sense to use this because obviously the Bertha Park roundabout is now in place, and we discussed rephasing the Alma Valley project at a previous meeting. We're looking at 1 and 1A now to start. So I now move the paper as is. Can I have someone to second for me? Councillor Illingworth, you're looking to second.
Yep, I'm happy to second this. With regards to construction traffic, if there are any deviations, I'm sure the community will let everybody know very, very quickly. So I'm convinced that everybody who's involved in the project will do their best to reduce this issue as quickly as possible. So I'm happy for this project to go ahead.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Do we have any amendments?
No.
No, I'll hold on just for a second because it seems to be a bit slow coming through, but there aren't any, I don't think. So I'll open up to comment, and Councillor Barnacle, you're on there for a comment.
Yeah, the thing that immediately struck me from what Mr. Salmon said was that Ibermoore junction, in response to the question from Councillor Waters, that Ibermoore junction is quite a difficult one in terms of getting out of onto fast moving traffic on the A85. So it presumably is going to be much improved by this new roundabout. So from that perspective alone, I think this is a good move. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Councillor. There are no more comments coming through. There's been no amendments, so members, the paper has been approved. Thank you very much. And we now move on to item 512 of our agenda this morning. This again relates to Alma Valley, and it is the erection of 284 dwelling houses, 21 detached garages, 56 flats, 3 retail units, a refuse bike store, and a sports changing pavilion. Formation of boundary treatments, retaining walls, leisure facilities, suds, ponds, parking areas, landscaping, and associated works. Approval of matters specified in conditions of planning permission 15/01157 or subsequently superseded by application 21/00383 phases 1 and 1A. This is allocated to site MU73. Again, I'll ask Mr. Smith to introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. But firstly, I just want to give you a quick update to the report. There's actually a typo in paragraph 97 of the papers where there is a not there in error. The paragraph should confirm that conservation matters do comply with the policy requirements, so the word not should be deleted from your mind. So apologies for that oversight, because it actually says the opposite from what it's supposed to. So, as you know, we're now turning to the second application related to Alma Valley Village, and again, I'll give you a brief introduction. So this time the application proposes the first 340 dwellings, leisure facilities, drainage arrangements, landscaping, secondary roads, path networks and other associated works. The secondary roads would largely access off the primary road, which was subject to the previous item on the agenda. The development area consists of, as we've discussed, the first 2 phases of 7 large development pockets associated to Alma Valley Village. And again, I'll take you through a series of slides setting the scene of the development proposed. So turning to the first still, this is again a satellite image with the extents of the application site, phases 1 and 1A highlighted in red. You will note the Ruthven Field roundabout to the right of the shaded area. The next slide. It's not moving on my screen. Well, in fact, it has. I just didn't notice the difference. The next slide gives the wider context to the overall Alma Valley Village site, including the larger southern part, which is actually excluded from the application proposals. The future applications will seek approval for the details associated to those later phases. Next slide. So this third slide returns to the area subject of the application and shows the proposed landscaping with extensive open space along the River Almond, with the bulk of the housing set to the south of that buffer. The area alongside the Almond includes playing fields, areas for formal play, orchards, and then there are wide green corridors running north to south, dividing the residential areas into different characters. To the south of the Lade is the local centre, which we will see in more detail in later slides. The next still shows the extensive network of paths proposed and more clearly the north-south green corridors I mentioned. Next, here we focus in more detail on the southern part of the proposals, incorporating the local centre, the nearby Lade crossings, paths and housing immediately to the north. The local centre itself are the buildings in the lower part of the image. These comprise some ground floor units for flexible business use, those flexible units located in the western side of that grouping, with access to the overall grouping taking off the primary road and parking is positioned to the front. Otherwise, the upper floors and the buildings to the east would be in residential use. The context and relationship related to Addy Kennels and Cattery, immediately west of the Lade and south of the proposed path and a Lade crossing, are all seen immediately right of the plan key on that slide. Next. For some design context, we can now see a range of elevations or streetscapes associated to the local centre we've just been looking at. This gives the impression of the scale and form of the buildings, with the green, red and blue coloured units on the ground floor identified for what could be a range of possible local services. We now move to a series of slides and photographs to give some context to the current situation. Firstly, this plan has arrows identifying where the following photographs are taken from, the loops being the area within the picture. So we will be looking to the west here. Next slide. So this image is taken from the access track that services Waterside Cottages, and as I say, is looking west. So what we have is an overlapping panoramic view, essentially from the centre of the application site. The lower image is a continuation of the upper. So looking at the top image from left to right, we have Hunting Tower to the left, and then move across to see the Almond Crescent and Bleachers Way residential areas before reaching the treed area bounding the River Almond. Moving to the bottom image, again left to right, we start with the housing at Almond Crescent, Bleachers Way, move across the treed boundary to the Almond, and then to Waterside Cottages, which are above the dog with its ball there. Next slide. Here the plan image again shows arrows identifying where the photo in the next image is taken from. It's actually from that track that you can see running north-south, accessing Waterside Cottages, which is immediately to the north of the upper arrow. Next slide. So here we again see that view from the track, but now looking east, with the Waterside Cottages captured far left and then out towards the Rothenfield roundabout, before to the right you can see large warehouses and the overhead electricity line that I mentioned in the previous presentation. Next slide. This shows numbering identifying where photos in the next slide are taken from, 1 and 2 being close to the access for Addy Kennels at the junction that also then goes up to Waterside Cottages and Hunting Tower immediately next to it. Number 3 is closer to Addy Kennels itself. So moving to the next slide, here we see image 1 with arrow pointing down the access to Addy Kennels and Cattery, the field to the left to form part of the proposals. Image 2, again moving closer and more directly, a view of the access to Addy with the development proposed beyond the hedge in the left of shot. And otherwise, image 3 is taken from close to the Addy complex, the open area in the foreground not being part of the proposals. We then go back to the final slide, which returns us to the overall plan setting out the proposals. Thank you, Vice Convener. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We have now a deputation, I believe, from Mr. Mcadam. I hope Mr. Mcadam's online. Can you hear me, Mr. Mcadam? And otherwise, image 3 is taken from close to the Addy complex, the open area in the foreground not being part of the proposals. Mr. Mcadam, can you hear me at all? Back to the final
yes,
slide.
I can.
You can, fine. Thank you very much. Now, as per usual, you'll have up to 10 minutes to give your deputation. My colleague will be timing you and he will interrupt you. If you get to the 9-minute mark, he will interrupt you to say that you have 1 minute left to speak. If you're happy with that, Mr. Mcadam, I'll let you proceed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Over to you.
Hello.
We can hear you. Over to you now. Are you there, Mr. Mcadam? Are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. We can hear you now. So if you proceed now, fine, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, councillors. My name is Stuart Mcadam, and I am the joint owner of Addy Kennels and Cattery, a business which has been in operation since 1966. We speak to you with deep concerns regarding the validity of the noise assessment has been carried out involving the proposed Alma Valley Village development, and wish to address them to you so that you can make a fair and informed judgment. It is well known that most noise complaints involve dogs. We are positioned within 20 metres of the development and run a successful boarding, kennels and cattery. Our major concern is with us producing noise pollution from our business that will affect the surrounding new build houses, thus causing issues with neighbours. Our business is licensed by Perth and Kinross Council for 26 dogs and 30 cats, housed in traditional wooden kennels. So as you can imagine, it can get very noisy on occasion, and the last thing we want is people complaining that the kennels are too noisy with all that would entail. Out of the blue, approximately 2 weeks ago, we were contacted by Savills, the land agent, who asked various questions as to how many dogs we board and if they stayed overnight. These are the people who commissioned the report. We were forthcoming with the information they requested. It appears to us the site has been visited 2 times. We have tried to get detailed information from Savills in the recent past, but were told that all the information was in the report, which is not the case. E.g., the exact time and dates of when the assessment was carried out and for how long it was carried out. Savills have not been able to provide this detailed information to us. The reason that it was requested is that there are critical times when it can be extremely noisy. Feeding times between 06:30 and 900 and 1600 to 1800. Also, when vehicles approach the premises between 11 and 1800 hours. We also have trial overnight stays for new dogs to see how they enjoy boarding. This can lead to excessive noise late at night and into the early morning. Unfortunately, one size does not fit all when it comes to dogs. We may have periods when there are quiet dogs staying and others when it is very noisy. The nearest occupied property to us at the moment is a minimum of 300 metres away. Mr. Callum Petrie, the planning officer, who is acting on behalf of the council and who has been liaising closely with us, came back with the following information from Savills. The assessment calculations were done on the number of 13 dogs boarding at one time in a building. Our licence issued by Perth and Kinross Council is for 26 dogs, so double the number that the assessment was carried out for, not the figure of 13 dogs that has been used. Again, the time of year that the assessment was carried out pre-COVID would be 2 of the quietest months of the year for our business, November 18 and April 19. Any assessment should have been carried out between May and October, and I would suggest over a sustained period, not just 2 visits. To summarise, the noise assessment, in our opinion, is flawed. It's been carried out for 13 dogs when in fact we are licensed for 26 dogs. It's been carried out with the assumption that dogs are housed in a brick and block building when in fact they are housed in traditional wooden kennels with an open frontage. This noise assessment has not been carried out independently but for the benefit of the land agent, and it appears that the site has only been visited twice for a limited time period. We would urge you to consider these facts very carefully before any final decisions are made. Councillors, I would like to thank you for giving me the time to put my concerns to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mcadam. Thank you for that. Thank you for your deputation.
You.
Could you please hold on? I think we've got some questions for you from councillors. If you can hold on
Certainly.
for me. I have a question from Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Mr. Mcadam, I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you for your presentation. It was clear and succinct, and I think I certainly have got the message. Vice Convener, I know exactly where this location is, and maybe I should have declared an interest, but Mr. Mcadam or his predecessors used to look after our wee cat many moons ago. So I know the location. It's ideally situated at the moment for kennels and a cattery. Understand the points about the noise, and I know the peak times for noise, Mr. Mcadam, understand that. Have the developers at all offered any discussion with you on mitigation, like an acoustic fence or anything like that, that would help deal with what you see as a problem, and you've been very honest about it? Has there been any discussion with the developers or with the planning service about any such facilities?
No, not from the developers. I have spoken with planners in the passing, but nothing's been firmed up at all. So. Okay, right.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks again for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener. Mr. Mcadam, thank you so much for your presentation. As my colleague has just said, very succinct, very to the point. I have a couple of questions, Convener, if that's okay. The first one, we've just passed the road and footpath. That footpath, which is close to the lady, is also close to your property. Am I right in thinking your dogs or your boarders could possibly see people crossing that lane, which would again increase that noise that you're concerned about?
Sorry, sir. Yes, absolutely. I've addressed this with the planners, and they are not prepared to move the lane crossing or the footpath crossing down further. I see no reason why it could be done. As in the military, we used to route recce. That could quite easily, the footpath to me could quite easily follow the route to the side of the road and cross further down.
Thanks for that, Mr. Mcadam. And just for clarity, you're not complaining about the noise from the development. You're worried more that your noise will cause a problem for people who you know, it's a bit like buying a house next to an airport. You know, you buy a house there and then complain about the noise of the aircraft. You're just highlighting a problem.
Yeah, I do not want to become a problem. In your question, you asked about noise from development. Yes, that there will be noise from development. I am concerned about that as to how dogs will react, but it's something that I would have to live with.
You're on mute, Councillor James, but you're fine.
Sorry, I said thank you very much, Mr. Mcadam.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Councillor Purvis, you have a question.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Mr. Mcadam, for your deputation. It follows on from Councillor Wilson's question. I suppose I'm just wondering, what is it that you're looking for from the committee today? Would some kind of condition to impose some kind of mitigation measures be sufficient, or do you think there's a fundamental flaw with the design in relation to the proximity to your business?
I personally think there's a fundamental flaw in the design. I mean, let's be realistic here. 26 dogs and you've got houses 20 metres away. People can bury their heads in the sand as much as they like, but there is a major noise problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. I'm looking now, there's no further questions coming through, Mr. Mcadam. So if I may, I will thank you very much for your deputation this morning. Thank you very much. We'll see that, call that an end then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Members, we have now Mr. Wood should be coming back in with us again, who we spoke to on the previous application. Mr. Wood, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Wood, did you want to make a deputation relating to this case or just take questions?
Yes, I do.
You do fine.
I do.
Okay. Once again, you have 10 minutes to make your deputation, and we'll call my colleague will call out at 9 minutes if we get to that stage. So over to you again.
Thank you, convener. I'm speaking today on behalf of the applicants Alma Valley Limited and Stuart Mill Limited. This AMSC application provides the detailed design for the first phase of 340 homes at Alma Valley. The application has been the subject of a thorough assessment of a whole range of issues, from public access strategies to biodiversity, landscaping, public transport, open space provision, noise, flood risk, drainage, traffic impact, housing design, garden sizes, bat boxes, and local shopping facilities, to name just a few. This presentation to you today is the culmination of hundreds of hours of efforts by your officers, statutory consultees, and the project team to deliver a fully assessed development layout and design for the first phase of homes at Alma Valley. There are no objections from external or internal council consultees, and we therefore trust you will be able to endorse your officer's recommendation to approve this application today. Turning to the comments made on behalf of the Addy Kennels facility by Mr. Mcadam, you'll note that at paragraph 77 of the committee report, that a further assessment of noise impacts from the kennels was undertaken at the request of the council's environmental health officer, following recent representations made by the council owners. This was undertaken by qualified noise assessors. This found that given the size, scale and operation of the facilities, there is no increase in background noise levels resulting from the kennels operation. There are two existing major noise generators in the general area of Alma Valley, the Giant Smiley potato facility and the Hunting Tower Hotel. It is the background noise levels that are assessed when undertaking a noise impact assessment. And indeed, the assessment in November 18 and April 19 undertaken in and around the whole site, including the Addy Kennel facilities, took readings during the daytime, evening and nighttime period to cover the operation of the facilities. This found that there was no increase in background noise levels stemming from the operation of the kennels. So therefore, regardless of the number of dogs or cats housed, that there was no impact on the background noise levels. The owners have confirmed that there is no outdoor exercise area at the kennels, and as stated on their website, dogs are walked at least twice a day for exercise, thereby removing any significant noise disturbance, as dogs are primarily resting and feeding at the kennels. Paragraph 78 of the committee report confirms that this is all to the satisfaction of the council's environmental health officer, and therefore councillors should be fully reassured that this matter has been thoroughly assessed and dealt with, and there will be no negative impacts on future residential amenity stemming from the continued operation of the successful Addy Kennels facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. I'm now going to open up to questions, if you can hang on the line. I have a question now from Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Thank you, Mr. Wood. I'm not reassured at all, I've got to say. In fact, you've raised more concerns in your submission just now than Mr. Mcadam did in his. Have you been on site and heard the level of noise from the kennels?
Yes, I've been involved in this project for over 15 years now, so I've been on site on many occasions and have witnessed various the existing background noise conditions on site.
Yeah, but with respect, sir, you keep talking about background noise, right? Background noise is the wind whistling through the trees and the occasional car going along the road. The dogs are not. I mean, Mr. Mcadam was very blunt about the amount of noise the dogs might make. I've been there regularly, but some time ago when the operation was slightly smaller, and there was significant noise from dogs when you drove in the driveway. Have you been on site and heard the noise of the dogs personally?
Yes, I have been not within the kennel facilities, but around the side of the kennel facilities, and have witnessed the noise of the dogs personally. In terms
Okay.
of background noise, that really I'm referring there to the existing noise levels that are generated by a number of operations in and around the development sites. Which
Yes,
is where
yes, I understand the
assessment-
definition of background noise, but I want to get to the nub of this matter. The kennels exist in a wee corner on their own at the moment, with very little passing traffic and stuff like that. So that's in a quiet corner where there's very, very little background noise, as you would put it, I think. This is going to change radically. There's going to be families around, there's going to be, I'm ignoring the construction phase completely because that will pass. But Vice Convener, we're going to have a substantial amount of traffic, a substantial amount of family noise and associated noise, and above and beyond the background noise. What are your proposals for mitigation that would allow the houses that are only 20 metres away not to have a problem with noise from the kennel? The cats are okay, but the dogs can be really noisy. So what's the answer, sir?
There is an existing access track in front of the kennels, which is fully accessible by members of the public. That will continue to be the case with the new development. There will be an improved public access route connecting the development in the vicinity of the kennels. So any noise disturbance will be similar to that existing. The houses are set back from the other side of the road, and as I've said, the noise assessment work, which has been undertaken by qualified practitioners, has concluded there will be no negative impact from the kennels at the distance that the houses will be at, and that the kennels will be able to continue its business unimpeded by the new housing proposed at Alma Valley.
Mr. Wood, I'll stop there. Vice Convener, thank you. I wish I was reassured, but I'm not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener, and again, thank you, Mr. Wood. Like Councillor Wilson, I too am not particularly reassured. Noise is an issue, and I know you said in paragraph 77 that another assessment was done. I'm a little disappointed that the owner of the kennels wasn't contacted and made aware, because as he said, there are times, and the noise assessment, I don't know how flawed this noise assessment was, with relation to the dogs. But while we're talking about noise, let's not also forget that not a million miles away from there, we have Hunting Tower Hotel, which is going to be in a very similar situation. I know that the owners there are very worried, and it will affect businesses. So is there any possibility of noise mitigation measures for the kennels and also the hotel, please?
So in terms of the hotel, there's late comments made in respect of potential noise impacts stemming from outdoor events, weddings that could take place or do take place. There is a proposed condition on the planning and on the committee report, condition 12, which requires further assessment of that to be that potential impact to be undertaken. We are not anticipating any significant impacts given the frequency and scale of events. However, as I say, that's required to be undertaken as part of further investigations. In respect of the back to the noise from the kennels, there are opportunities, but if necessary, there could be opportunities for a noise barrier or improvement of noise mitigation measures in and around the kennels if the committee see that as something that they would like to be taken forward. But as I say, the overall noise assessment predicts there'll be no negative impacts on future residential amenity, which has been agreed by the council's own environmental health officer.
Thanks. Can I follow up, please?
You may. Yep.
Thanks very much, Mr. Wood. Yeah, I take your point. You keep saying our own environmental health people say that there's going to be no impact. The fact of the matter is that they're using a noise impact assessment, which we think is, or you know, what we're being told, it wasn't done at a time when the noise would have been at its worst. If condition 12, which as you rightly point out, says that a noise impact assessment has to be done at Hunting Tower Hotel, can I ask you that you liaise with the owners, and perhaps at the same time, Mr. Mcadam, sorry, at Addy Kennels, and do a noise assessment at a time when there is noise rather than a time when there isn't, please?
Can I come back to that question?
Yes, please, Mr. Wood.
That would be perfectly acceptable to the applicants. And
thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson, your question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My point has just been covered with that last comment, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question, and thank you for your deputation. The question that I had was on flooding in relation to some of the objections that have been raised by local residents and also by Medvin and District Community Council. Now, I know that we've obviously been presented with the flooding report and information from Kaya Consulting, but one of the concerns that has been raised by some of the objectors is that previous flood risk assessments, such as those undertaken for the Almond Bank flood protection scheme and the Western Link Road, showed a significantly higher flood risk, and they've obviously called into question whether some of the methods and the time that some of these assessments were undertaken is giving a full picture, particularly given that the Almond Bank flood prevention scheme may lead to an increased flood risk downstream, as it were. So I'm just wondering if you had any comment on those objections and what the applicant's view is on the validity or otherwise of those.
As part of the flood risk assessment, Kaya Consultants who undertook that work were required by CPAT and the Council's flood prevention officers to undertake sensitivity testing of their modelling to align that with both the modelling undertaken for the Almond Bank flood prevention scheme and the A985 junction improvements, which were undertaken by two different companies. So they were required to use their modelling and compare and contrast the models to make sure there were no differences in terms of the assumptions made, or that where there were differences, that those were fully investigated. Now that was all undertaken to the satisfaction of SEPA, and indeed we used SEPA's own modelling data of the River Almond to inform that. We were also required to undertake adverse scenario testing, such as the River Almond being blocked at the new Bertha Park crossing by debris, so that we could model what that impact would have. We also modelled what impact there would be from erosion of the North Bank, if there was any of that continuing. So it really is, the flood risk assessment and model has been thoroughly vetted and thoroughly tested, stress tested, to assess all eventualities, and is in line with the Council's very recently adopted flood risk supplementary guidance, and there is no objection to this application from either SEPA or the Council's flood prevention officer in respect of any potential flooding issues.
Councillor Purvis, do you have a follow-up, or are you happy with that?
No, I think I'd probably be straying into comment if I said anything further.
Okay,
so.
fine. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you, Mr. Wood, for the presentation. You know, now that we're on flooding, it really is the elephant in the room here, because we're on a floodplain, and for many years the fact has been discussed and have been opposed development here because it's a floodplain. And the other big elephant in the room is the fact that recently we've had extraordinary flooding instances, not only in the UK but globally, some really devastating instances, unprecedented, frankly. And in view of that, you know, all precautions need to be taken, even reassurances that yes, if that happened, that it won't flood. If this happened, it won't flood. You never know. And you did mention in your presentation that design of houses come into it. Now, I seem to recall from a meeting some time ago on this very site, or discussing this very site, where it was mentioned that floor levels, ground floor levels, would be kept significantly higher than outside levels. Is this in fact a feature in the design of these houses?
Okay, to take your first comments, the detailed design of the scheme has been undertaken to accord with the Council's own recently adopted supplementary guidance on flooding, and I think that was adopted in February of this year. So it's been assessed to up to the latest requirements. In respect of the principle of the development on the site, that has long since been established by the 2017 Planning Permission in Principle, which has recently been amended on the 29th of June this year by the Council. So that covers the principle of residential development on this site. Your second part of your question in relation to finished floor levels, there are conditions in the Planning Permission in Principle which require finished floor levels to be at a certain height, which is typical to provide, typical of many or all major housing applications, to provide a further protection against extreme flooding events. We have clarified in the detailed design before you today, takes full cognizance of both our flood risk assessment studies and the design guidance and conditions set out in the Planning Permission in Principle to require finished floor levels to be of a suitable height to account for any extreme flooding events. Thank you.
Can you put a figure on that height?
It is 600 millimetres above the finished floor level.
600 metres, yeah, above external levels.
Above. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm having no further questions coming through. So, Mr. Wood, I think that's it. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for both your deputations this morning and taking the time to be here. I think we're finished now, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Wood, hold on a second. There's a question come through. Councillor Waters, would you like to have a question, please?
Sorry, Vice Convener, I was preempting the questions for officers there.
Okay, fine. I think Mr. Wood's now gone, so members, we'll now open up to questions to officers. If I may indulge for a moment and ask a question first, take precedence for the convener. It's a question regarding affordable housing. Not been mentioned at all. There are 85 affordable housing units on the site. Are they going to be spread throughout the site, or or how they're going to be planned in? Could I ask officers?
Well, they will be spread throughout the overall Almond Valley site, but
Right.
and you know, as we've discussed many times before, for operational reasons, it tends to be that if it's an RSL that they prefer to have their grouping of units together, so it will be spread throughout the development and the phases that happen, but in this case it is grouped together.
Right. Fine. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. So the first question is Councillor Waters. Then, please, your question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just going to the noise situation with the kennels and Cattery, and Mr. Mcadam's concerns regarding that I think he described it. I do not want to become a problem, and he's very concerns over the noise. There's a memorandum from Environmental Health, which the memorandum was dated the 27th of August. Regarding this, although it was added to the portal, sorry, 27th of August 2020, but it was added to the portal on the 27th of July this year, which clearly states that and I'll read it out, the consultant states that noise from the kennels was inaudible during the site visit and therefore not possible to undertake an assessment with respect to LMAX, which highlighted that noise disturbance at night time is not expected from the kennel. As a few of the other councillors, I have a bit of concern about this, and just want to check on. Mr. Wood made a comment that they may be able to look at mitigation to this to try and limit the noise and the spread of noise to what will be quite close houses. What would be the legal situation? A man putting a condition in to enable that the developer does put some. This shouldn't sit on Mr. Mcadam's any costs relating to controlling the noise. It should really sit on the developer. And I just want to ask on the ability to put a condition in to actually ensure that mitigation happens, because once one dog starts barking, it does tend to set off them all. And the nighttime comment, it does seem, in my view, that's when you notice dogs barking the most, is in the middle of the night when the background noise is quiet. So I'm not sure on the comment within the memorandum. Just like a bit of response from officers on that. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, would you like to answer on that one?
Yes, I think you're quite right. A bit of clarification is required, because much of the discussion, including the commentary from Mr. Mcadam, reflects concerns which were raised some time ago and which have subsequently been subject to quite significant further work, which reviewed the situation and updated the assessment to reflect the questions raised, such as the number of dogs and cats that he had, the periods of closure, activity, etc. And that, I understand, has been reported to Mr. Mcadam, so I was a little bit surprised that he doesn't seem to be aware of that. But that additional work that's been undertaken has been reviewed in terms of the entirety of the information, and there is satisfaction that the arrangements that would be in place are acceptable and that no additional mitigation is required. And noise assessment indicates that the noise levels predicted through the activity will not result, despite the proximity that's identified, in adverse impact that would see the agent of change, which would be the housing developed, adversely affected by the operation of the business. So perhaps maybe my environmental health colleague Lynn Reid can comment in more detail, as it is a complex matter, particularly when accounting for wider context of what will be. So again, there's a difference between what the situation is at the minute, and Councillor Wilson obviously indicated that there is a degree of isolation to this unit at the minute, and that will change. But it's the change scenario which has been looked at, as well as the times, etc. So perhaps Lynn can give a little bit more information. But the situation is there has been further work done, and that has again found that the impact will not require mitigation.
Lynn, would you like to come in?
Yeah, good morning, committee.
Morning.
Yeah, The noise impact assessment was done originally, and the background level was monitored over several days, taking in the morning, evening and nighttime period. And then concerns were raised with the fact that the capacity of the kennels at the time of that monitoring. So the noise consultant was then asked to address that, and he came back with further information. And on that further information, what he has taken is he's taken the noise that was for 13 dogs barking, and then he has added that, which you can do logarithmically, and then he has extrapolated that noise at the kennels for 26 dogs to the distance to where these new proposed houses will be. And then what you do then is you look at that noise level at the proposed houses, and then the background level again, which was taken throughout a whole period, and then the lowest background level throughout all that monitoring is the one that was being used. And then excuse me, I've not been very well, so my throat's a bit croaky. So yeah, so there was no addition of dB levels to that background level, so therefore, you know, no further mitigation was required. It was covered in at 43 dB, and the background level was measured at 43 dB, showing that there would be no mitigation required. And that is an acceptable methodology to be used. So environmental are quite satisfied that there will be no effect from noise from the kennels on these proposed new properties, which are about 25 metres away.
Mr. Smith, did you want to come back in again?
Yeah, so it's maybe just giving that closure to that context, that because the noise assessment, which, you know, from our perspective appears to address all the queries that have been raised, seems to indicate, or we are satisfied that it indicates that no mitigation is required. So we've already undertaken consideration of a noise assessment that appears robust, because there's been a lot of comment saying that it's an inadequate noise assessment. That is not what our consideration is. The noise assessment appears adequate, and we are satisfied with its terms. It's been undertaken by an appropriate party and assessed by our own parties responsible for assessing noise assessments, and we are satisfied that there is no mitigation required. I appreciate that Mr. Mcadam may not agree with that, but that is our view.
Can I come back, please?
You can indeed,
Vice Convener. I assume this latest information isn't on the portal, given the latest memorandum from Environmental Health very much says that it wasn't able to determine the marks. Also, just you know, Mr. Mcadam actually stated that that if he's seen the noise assessment, that it took the animals as being in the building, and I fully understand the ability to model stuff with more numbers based on doing samples of lesser numbers, but that always depends on having the right information that's going in, and it can get very skewed if you don't have the information, get the right information going in, i.e. you're taking the assumption that the animals are, the dogs will be indoors when they won't be indoors. It can make a big difference. And just as well, coming back to my initial question, is there ability with this committee to from a legal perspective to put an amendment in, and I don't know how to do that, that's why I'm asking the question, is that to put an amendment in to further look at putting some level of mitigation in there, as Mr. Wood insinuated that he would be prepared to at least look at, to do, for the competence of this, any decision that's made or any potential ability to ask that a condition be put in to mitigate it.
Mr. Smith, you want to answer?
Yeah, I think that there's two things there. I think that the majority, it would appear to me from listening to Mr. Mcadam, were comments that relate to previous situations that's not up to date in relation to the current position and the review that was undertaken. And my understanding is, and I'm not looking at the portal at the minute, but there is an updated email exchange from Environmental Health that clarifies a number of the positions, setting out the situation. And beyond that, again, I would just clarify that it's our position that a noise assessment has been undertaken which is adequate, that sets out the situation in relation to noise and determines that there are no mitigations required. So we have a noise assessment that has been looked at, we are satisfied with, it reviews the situation and indicates that no mitigations are required. So to an extent, I may have a concern, and perhaps we can clarify this legally, that if we're applying a condition requiring a noise assessment, that wouldn't serve a planning purpose, because the matter has already been assessed, considered and settled to an extent. So maybe Colin would need to comment on whether we can apply a condition effectively asking for something that we already have.
Mr. Elliott.
Thank you, Convener. Excuse me. I think there's two different aspects. Is you have to ask yourself what actually you're looking for. You referred to putting in mitigation, but that's drawing a conclusion that mitigation is required, and you would then need to specify what the mitigation is, such as fencing, bunding, etc. That, I think, in the information I have, is going too far. In terms of getting an updated assessment, again, any condition you would have to justify based on the information you have. And what Mr. Smith is saying is, and Lynn Reid has said as well, is that a further assessment has been carried out and it didn't require any further mitigation. So I appreciate the concerns. However, conditions are imposed for a planning purpose, and they have to be based on information. So you would have to kind of clearly justify that before considering an additional condition.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gray, you're next on my list.
Well, gentlemen, you'll be astonished, and ladies, you're astonished that my question is very similar to Councillor Waters, and it really was a question for Mr. Elliott to try and give some comfort to Mr. Mcadam, who politely pointed out that he's been there for 55 years. He's been keeping dogs there for all this time. He's not complaints. He is now going to be faced with some very near neighbours. As close as 60 metres away, 20 metres away, sorry. And he fears that there will be complaints in due course from people, like Councillor James said, when you buy a house beside an aerodrome and then complain about airplanes, same will happen here. I would be very surprised if it didn't happen here regarding dogs. And could Mr. Elliott clarify the situation? Mr. Mcadam has these dogs there. He's already pre-warned everyone here of the possible danger he fears, that people will buy a house there and then start complaining about his business. In what circumstances would he be wrong in maintaining dogs which are barking close to houses which weren't there when he started his business?
Mr. Elliott, for your view.
Councillor Gray, I think you have to take yourself back to what is in front of you, and what you've got in front of you is a report of handling that clearly indicates, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate where Mr. Mcadam is coming from, but Mr. Smith has clearly said that the majority of Mr. Mcadam's comments relate to the original assessment, whereas there's been a further update and it's been further assessed, as Lynn Reid has said, and there's indications that there will be nothing, it won't adversely affect. I appreciate there may be concerns in that regard, but as committee is well aware of what I always say from the legal perspective. If you've got doubts in it on an assessment, you have to explain where that assessment is incorrect. So, whilst I do appreciate the concerns, yes, it's a well-established, long-running business. You're assessing a planning application. There have been assessments done, and it's they've a further assessment done, I should say, and it's indicated that there wouldn't be any adverse effect given the background details.
Well, if we project to the future and someone did complain, where would Mr. Mcadam stand in such a situation?
Well, I think that's something which is going further into a position which is beyond where you are at the moment. I appreciate where you're coming from. But I'm coming back to, you have an assessment and it has come out in a certain way. So, you know, is it difficult for me to really answer any further? I'm not sure if Mr. Smith has anything more to add there.
Yeah, I can maybe clarify two things. So we've had a look at what the situation on the portal is. Councillor Waters was referring back to a document from August of 2020. But if you actually go onto the portal, there is an email exchange dated 10th of August this year, which has the updated environmental health position on the issue there. And that has the background assessment within it. I'd also maybe make reference to the agent of change principle. So as you can hear from the discussion here, this is an issue that we are more than aware of. We have looked into in quite some detail. We have challenged the applicant on it. They are what's called the agent of change. So they are introducing change to the locality, which has a new dynamic proposed. We have looked at that, and noise assessment which has been undertaken and reviewed and updated and reassessed all indicates that the parameters that are likely to occur would be such that no mitigation is required. So I mean, it's not, we have not looked at this issue. In fact, we have looked at this issue in great detail a number of times and been challenged both by Mr. Mcadam and in turn discussed the matter in quite some detail with the applicants. But it has led us to the position after all that assessment that no mitigation is required.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gray, I just noticed you've got another question appearing further down the list. Did you want to ask another question, or was that just duplicated itself? One went at 11:19, you have another one at 11:20. You're on mute still, sorry. You're still on mute.
No further question.
No further question, fine, okay, no problem. Councillor Wilson, your question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'll have one more go at this noise issue. And this is for Christian and or Lynn to respond to. The consultant's report, was it made on the assumption that the dogs would be indoors or outdoors? We've heard of some arithmetical reason of making 13, 24 or 26, which I nearly buy, but was the assumption the dogs would be indoors or outdoors?
Mr. Smith first.
Yeah, there are various scenarios looked at within the assessment, including their housing, their feeding, etc. But I'd probably defer that to Lynn to maybe give you a bit more detail. As I said earlier, it is a complex matter, so perhaps Lynn's more suited to respond.
My understanding was that this was the noises from the kennels, and there's no outdoor exercise area, so it would be taken for the noise, and the noise was monitored over a whole period of days. So that would have taken into account any feeding times, any other times that the dogs were getting let out of the kennels to go for walks. So my understanding is that all those kind of scenarios would be encapsulated in the monitoring at that time.
Okay, Lynn, so the assumption was that the dogs would be retained in kennels but not in houses. Am I right in thinking that? They would be in the kennel, they'd either be in the kennels getting exercised or getting fed. The
Yes.
Kennels are not enclosed in the same sense that a domestic residence is.
No.
Okay,
No.
Right. So right, Vice Convener, I therefore think this report has a basic flaw in it, because if you get nearly 30 dogs outdoors to a degree, right, it's not the same as having dogs inside domestic residences where you quieten them down, one barks, the other one doesn't. And I think there is I'm totally unassured by the Savills representative. I'm sorry, Mr. Wood. Totally unassured. It'll be okay on the night approach, and that is one thing that I don't think we can afford to do. Vice Convener, we've only got one shot at this, and there will be further discussion in the debate on it. But my view, the report is flawed.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilson. We'll come back to that as we go through, but let's get some questions out of the way first of all. Councillor Simpson, your question.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I still have a question about paragraph 77 of the noise. I think I would refer officers to the last sentence, which states that these measures will ensure no adverse impact on the operation of these businesses. Whilst none of us can predict the future, Vice Convener, I wonder where we go if this our contention is incorrect, and we find that in the future there is an adverse effect. Where do we go from there? What means do we have to offer any protection to the hunting tower hotel or the kennels if we find that the noise of 26 barking dogs does indeed disturb the new residents?
Mr. Smith first, and perhaps back to
I'll maybe come in first and maybe refer back to Councillor Wilson there as well. I'm not sure what he was saying, and what I took from what Councillor Wilson was saying, that he is of the view that the noise assessment was undertaken on the basis of the dogs being within a dwelling house, which is not the case. The noise assessment's been undertaken on the basis of the situation at the site and that they're housed in kennels. So that was maybe just a clarification. Turning to Councillor Simpson, the noise assessment can only predict likely scenarios. So if there is in the future, I don't know, some extreme event happens, or I don't know, a new breed of dog that is much noisier than dogs at the moment, etc., etc. We can only satisfy ourselves on the basis of scenarios that are appropriate at this point in time, and that's what we've done. What we are not doing is guaranteeing that there is absolutely no chance that anything might happen in the future that we cannot predict at this point in time. But on the basis of how we must assess things, we are satisfied. If that gives you an answer, Councillor Simpson, or you maybe want to follow up on that.
If I may, Vice Convener, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying, Mr. Smith. My concern is that there is no protection to the existing businesses if the sort of residents that Councillor James referred to about airports, or who buy a house next to a church and then notice the bells ring on a Sunday. There is no protection to these people if our contention, or the officer's contention, that there's no adverse impact, it turns out not to be the case.
Well, the protection is there in that we have looked in extreme detail at the issue, in line with agreed methodologies established to deal with looking at this issue, and we are satisfied that the likelihood is that the noise impacts will not require mitigation. Again, the way in which, and again, Lynn is maybe more, well, is definitely more qualified to comment on this. The way in which noise impact will be assessed is relatively complex and looks at periods of extended time to mitigate out peaks and troughs, so that you get a position that is deemed to be an appropriate noise level over a period of time. It may well be that there are peaks, as I say, and or troughs where noise levels reduce, but the way in which we've looked at it meets with the standards that we have in place. Therefore, we are satisfied with the approach that's being taken. So that gives the protection to any developer that they have looked at the position and that their future customers will not be affected. But equally, looking at the situation relative to the established business, the agent of change being the proponent of the new development, who are responsible for satisfying the council such that the council is able to make an informed decision, which is the position we've reached, and recommend that the application is approved but not requiring to incorporate mitigation because the information does not indicate that any mitigation is required.
Is that fine, Councillor Simpson, or do you want to
Happy
follow
with
up?
that. Thank you, Vice
Fine.
Convener.
Thank you very much. So I'll turn to Councillor Barnacle. You now have a question.
Yes, thanks, Vice Convener. I share some of the concerns that have been expressed by colleagues about the noise issue, but my question really is picking up on what Councillor Gray asked when he spoke and questioned the applicant's agent on the flooding mitigation. We get really extreme weather events more often now. I think this is a fact of life. And looking at the plan, although there are some open spaces between the River Almond and this phase of development, I would just like to ask whether I think it was stated that the above floor level mitigation was 600 millimeters, is that right? But I did wonder whether Mr. Smith could confirm whether or not there'd been any discussion at all about the houses nearer to the Almond, looking at the design from the point of view of the ground floor being garages and storage areas and the living area being on the second floor, whether that had even been raised as an option in the design of houses that are relatively close to a river that can flood.
Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Councillor Barnacle. In terms of that issue, Gavin from Structure and Flooding can maybe clarify the detail of the flood risk situation, but in terms of the generality of it, the planning permission in principle sets out through a number of conditions what would be required in terms of finished floor levels, and that would be, I believe it was condition 27 and 28 of that planning permission in principle, which says that finished floor levels would be a minimum of 600 millimetres above 200-year flood level, and otherwise garden levels of all properties would be a minimum of 300 millimetres above the 200-year flood level, and that would then mitigate the flood risk. So subject to those floor levels being at that point, there wouldn't be any require for elevating by any other means, but how they get to that point would be open to the developer. At this subject application, there's no flipping of floor areas to have garages, or let's call it non-usable domestic spaces at ground level below that 600 mil above 200 year. It's a fairly standard approach because the levels are appropriate and there wouldn't be the flood risk. But as I say, maybe Gavin can give a wider perspective and then a bit more detail.
Mr. Bissett, would you like to add to that?
Yep, thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Christian, there for that response. It's kind of been covered. Mr. Wood's response certainly covered the flooding issue quite well, and Christian as well there. There has been obviously detailed assessments and robust review of that by ourselves and SEPA, and as Christian said, ultimately we've identified the functional floodplain, and that is the areas that are not suitable for development for residential development. So therefore the need for further mitigation other than the elevated flow levels set out by the condition of the planning in principle, essentially there wasn't further discussion around sacrificial ground levels. Just to simply answer your question there, Councillor Barnacle, that wasn't required ultimately, as the site has been designed in compliance with the Council's statutory guidance, supplementary guidance, and the Scottish planning policy, given that it's the development layout is out with the functional floodplain. There is obviously elevated finished flow levels, and that is to account for the uncertainty in modelling, and it also is to help manage against sort of surface water flood risk, which is slightly different to your larger rivers like the River Almond. So that means you don't have thresholds sitting straight at road level, which encourages runoff straight into the doors. So by just having an upstanding, that in itself gives a degree of protection there from these more intense summer events. So hopefully that's answered your question there.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Bissett. I now have Councillor Purvis for a question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. And it actually follows on from Councillor Barnacle's question in relation to flooding, and also the question that I put to the agent of the applicant. I suppose it was just to ask for officers' view on the points that I made that have been raised in some of the objections about the difference in assessment from Kaya Consulting versus some of the previous assessments that were done in relation to the Almond Bank Flood Protection Scheme and the Western Link Road. The primary difference being that Kaya Consulting assessed the situation as being less severe in terms of flood risk. Just to give some additional context, the reason for my concern is that this was exactly the same situation that we had in relation to the Lathrow Meadows development in Kinross, where Kaya Consulting's assessment of the flood risk was significantly less than what had previously been undertaken by Mason Land Surveys. And obviously there are still a number of issues that are ongoing with local residents adjacent to that development, but also problems with groundwater on that site as well. So I suppose my concern is, and I know that all companies that undertake such exercises might do them slightly differently within professional standards that are set out. I'm concerned that this seems to be a similar situation, and seeking some reassurance that the council don't consider that to be the case.
Mr. Bissett.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. As Mr. Wood highlighted, there was obviously a robust review of it done in relation to previous assessments, and both ourselves and SEPA were ultimately satisfied with that. So in short, we don't have any concerns. The modelling also considered the now developed Almond Bank flood scheme, which obviously flood protection schemes aren't developed to protect any potential land for future development. So there was no justification for that in terms of direct benefit for this site, but it did provide an indirect benefit by cutting off some flow paths linking the East Pow and Town Lade, which has an indirect benefit for this site, which may account for some of the reduced risk that we're seeing between the assessments. So ultimately, all I can reassure you with is that it has been robustly reviewed. It wasn't myself that carried out the reviews, and unfortunately, it's been a long ongoing process, this application and the planning in principle. So unfortunately, some of the officers are no longer with the council, or unfortunately the other one's off on leave, but a robust review has been carried out, and with SEPA as well. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance.
Councillor Purvis, do you have a follow-up, or you?
No, I think thanks for that response, Mr. Bissett.
Thank you. Councillor Reid, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and I hope you don't think I'm barking mad going back to paragraph 77. I'm very confused because it clearly states in paragraph 77 that the outcome of the additional assessment established that, subject to mitigation being secured, no unacceptable impact on future residential amenity was predicted. And this is completely opposite to what we've been told, unless there's a new statement out from somebody. It clearly says that mitigation is required.
Mr. Smith, could you clarify?
That paragraph 77 is looking at noise and vibration issues associated to the entirety of the development. And if you read the report in its entirety alongside the various conditions, there are a number of issues that do require mitigation, and there are conditions associated to that. So what that is saying is, in the entirety of noise and vibration issues, there are some mitigations required, but in the isolated situation of Addy Kennels, that is not one of those scenarios. So I can appreciate why you're maybe confused by that paragraph, but if you go to the referenced conditions, they specify what it relates to, which is not Addy Kennels.
Right, well, I'm even more confused now, because it does say existing businesses, including that from Addy Kennels and Cattery, to understand what impacts these operations may have on the amenity experienced by occupants. And it clearly states that mitigation is required.
Well, if you look at that sentence
from Addy Kennels and Cattery, it clearly states that.
Well, what it states is, and again, looking at the paragraph in the whole, first part relates to a noise assessment is undertaken. It then says this considered operational noise from existing businesses, including that of Addy Kennels and Cattery, to understand what impacts these operations may have on the amenity experienced by occupants of the proposed dwelling houses. So all that's saying is the noise assessment also looked at Addy Kennels. It doesn't then lead to, and mitigation is required in relation to Addy Kennels.
My interpretation, unfortunately, is completely different to yourselves, Mr. Smith. I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
Hopefully I've clarified that for you then, that's not the intent of that paragraph.
I totally, maybe I was in mute there, I totally disagree with your interpretation of that, and I think mitigation must be secured against, if I were buying a house and it was 20 metres away from a kennels, I would be wanting my money back.
Well, that's a comment, Councillor Reid. But Mr. Smith, is there anything to follow up on that, or are you happy with your reply?
No, again, maybe I've clarified that there. What that's saying is the noise assessment incorporated assessment of Addy Kennels, but what that individual sentence is not saying is that mitigation is required in relation to Addy Kennels. I think we've discussed that in quite some detail.
Can you tell me what mitigation is required?
Yes, if we go to conditions 6 and 8 and condition 12, that sets out the situation there, and as does the noise assessment in itself, looking at the various items that require mitigation. So that, I think, again, it was being referred to in some of the presentation and other commentary, that the potato sheds and the operation there requires an element of mitigation. And I think there is an acoustic fence to be provided in relation to that. And in addition, we're looking for some further work to be done in terms of the operations at Huntingdower.
Mr. Smith, I'm reading through the conditions myself, and I can understand what you're saying. I understand the point Councillor Reid is saying as well. It is somewhat ambiguous, but I understand what you're saying. Councillor Reid, are you happy with that now? Or?
No, I'm not happy, but this could go on and on forever.
Right. Okay, fine. Okay. Members, I'm not seeing any further questions coming through now. Councillor Reid, I think was the last question I have. So we're now in the situation, perhaps we move to the debate. So members, is there anyone who wishes to put a motion forward?
Could I raise a point of order before we go into that?
Yeah, if you wish, yes, certainly, Councillor Wilson. Yep, certainly.
Yeah, there have been two big issues raised by members. Flooding is one of them, and noise is the other one. And whilst I've no wish to stop the process going ahead for this development. My goodness, been on the go for 30+ years, Vice Convener. But I think there are serious concerns expressed by members, and we've asked the questions, we've had answers. In some instances, we're not happy with the answers, and we're not allowed to not accept the answers, but we can still be unhappy with them or disagree with them. And perhaps, I don't know whether Councillor Gray and others wish to pursue the flooding matter, or whether they're content with the answers they've received. But several of us in the room, I think, are still unhappy about the noise situation, about the kennels. And maybe we could ask Mr. Elliott what would be competent for us to move as a condition in this regard. Now, he'll be in some difficulty with that because we've got advice from experts and the planners and our other officers to say it'll be okay. Right? That's what in summary they're saying, and mitigation isn't required. Several of us don't agree with that. What, as I said earlier, Vice Convener, we only get one shot at this, but we're making the ultimate decision. So what's available to us through you, Vice Convener, to Mr. Elliott to express our concerns about that, without derailing the whole application?
I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Wilson, and I appreciate you're right. There's a one shot and we have to get it right because of the size and the concern. So, Mr. Elliott, could you give us some advice on this, please?
Maybe Mr. Smith might be better placed to answer myself. The difficulty you have here is, you're quite correct, Councillor Wilson, kind of referring to my previous answer on this, is that if you're looking to put in remedial works, you are then saying these are required because there are problems, and you don't have that information before you. And you also would be then saying, we want this, and you would need to specify exactly what you're wanting, and that's not been assessed through the planning application. And of course, yes, I come back to that you've got assessments before you, the technical assessments, and yes, there has been a further assessment indicating that there aren't specific issues. So really, it's a question of, is there information, sufficient information? And I appreciate people are concerned or unhappy with things, but is there sufficient information to indicate that's wrong? And of course, you have to produce that. But it's really a question of information here, I would say, more than anything else, Councillor Wilson. But I think in terms of, I appreciate that Mr. Wood said that they would potentially look at things. So it might be appropriate to go over to Mr. Smith and whether there could be a condition brought in some way, because I appreciate there's a condition referring to the Hunting Tower Hotel. I'm not sure whether that would be appropriate in terms of the kennels because the assessment's done, but I'm not sure. Maybe Mr. Smith has a view on that.
Mr. Smith, could I perhaps ask for your comment? Again, obviously, I do recall that Mr. Wood said he would be prepared to do something here. So with that in mind, could I ask for your comment on this?
Well, maybe separating out the Hunting Tower Hotel and Addy Kennels, the Hunting Tower Hotel situation is that there are a couple of questions that still need to be confirmed in relation to that, because there was information that wasn't able to be gathered at that point in time given the situation we've all been through. So we've taken a belt and braces approach of, because it's incomplete in terms of the overall methodology, although we are theoretically satisfied that things should be okay, we're just seeking clarification on those points. It's a bit more advanced in relation to the situation at Addy Kennels, that we have been through the mill on it and looked at it in quite some detail, and the evidence indicates that there is no mitigation required. I do, however, fully appreciate that, taking a step back myself as a layperson, I'm not a qualified acoustician, that I would go, yes, it's quite close. So I would think that there would be an impact. So that question has then been put across and said, well, it looks quite close. Can you double check everything in relation to all these other elements? That has been done by the appropriately qualified parties and again clarifies the situation. It's been assessed by our own environmental health team. Therefore, the position seems quite clear that no mitigation is required. I saw a comment from Councillor Waters in the chat And maybe just to clarify that, the noise assessment in itself has not been subject to an addendum, but the issues that would be included in any addendum are all set out in correspondence, and that has been satisfactory to us. So an addendum to the noise assessment would simply be a technicality. But my view is that, again, it's for Colin to maybe confirm, but I don't see a reason why we would apply a condition, and if there is no reason to, under the various tests that conditions require to pass, then it's not a competent condition.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I've got a point of order request coming in from Councillor James. Councillor James, would you like to put that forward first before I come back with a comment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, convener. And I take Mr. Smith's point. With regard, we've got to go back to Hunting Tower Hotel to clarify some of the issues regarding noise. But we've taken for granted that the noise assessment carried out at Addy Kennels is okay, when we've been told by Mr. Mcadam that the noise assessments were carried out when there were no dogs there. The assumption is that it's based on 13 dogs when there weren't. So should we not be going back and redoing that with Mr. Mcadam's knowledge, so that we can assess it properly? It's all very well, multiplying and what have you, but if you're multiplying the sum of one dog when you think you've got 13, of course you're going to get a flawed figure. So I'm personally, as somebody who rescues dogs and have 5 of my own, there's somebody with a kennel 500 meters up the road from me with only 2 dogs, and trust me, I can hear them very loud and clear. These aren't brick-built kennels, as the assumption was. They're wooden kennels, which is pretty much like having dogs outdoors. If there's no dogs there, there's going to be no noise.
Thank you, Councillor James. I was going to just say you drifted into comment, but Mr. Smith, you want to answer that?
Yeah, maybe just clarify the situation again. A number of times throughout the discussion today, whether it be from Mr. Mcadam or a number of other queries that have been raised, are reflecting back on the position prior to the further assessment. So the queries raised in relation to the assessment only covers 13 dogs. That's been dealt with, and that has been multiplied up, and an additional piece of work undertaken to reflect all the comments that were raised by Mr. Mcadam. So these concerns that have been set out by Mr. Mcadam, and he reiterated in his presentation, reflect to the situation prior to that further assessment being undertaken. But maybe again, Lynn can clarify the situation further, because the interaction has by and large been via the Environmental Health Service.
Yeah, the methodology of doubling up when you have measured a source and it's not equated to the amount of dog or capacity, then that's an acceptable methodology, which is used if somebody was putting in an application and the kennels wasn't there, so you couldn't monitor the noise from dogs barking. And it's acceptable to go to another establishment that is similar and take the noise reading from there, and then, as was in this case, then it was then advised that the maximum capacity of the dogs was 26. So therefore, it was assessed with worst case scenario of 26 dogs barking within that establishment all at the one time. So this was a worst case scenario, and taking the worst case scenario, it still concluded that there would be no adverse effects on those proposed new houses. So therefore, no further mitigation was necessary. Does that clarify it a bit better?
Okay, fine. I've got another point of order flashing up now from Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and just really to Mr. Elliott on a general point of principle here with how we're assessing applications. I completely appreciate that we as councillors are not experts on these particular issues, and we are relying on the information that's provided to us and those assessments. But there are instances, and whether or not this is an example that I can recall, of where assessments have said that something is fine, and then when it's borne out in reality after a development has been completed, I'm thinking of parking at Lathrop Meadows is another good example, and that has been wildly inaccurate and far from the truth. So I'm entirely confident that these assessments have been carried out as they should have been. But sometimes the way in which they are carried out does not tally with what the situation is in the real world. And the problem that we have is we can't provide an alternative assessment because we're not qualified to do that. But the role of we as councillors surely is to provide a check and balance and to check whether something is works out in reality. And the problem that we have is if we took it to the nth degree, and had to accept all assessments, then we would never be able to refuse anything. So I think surely there must be a way of, if we disagree with an assessment, even without being able to provide a counter assessment, because clearly we can't do that, of using that as a justification for refusing the application. That's a general point rather than just the specific, but I don't know if you're able to comment on that.
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener. It's obviously you're looking at the general context there, Councillor Purvis. The difficulty is you're applying specific to general. I can only really talk in the general because your process in assessing an application is you have the information before you, and obviously assessments have been carried out. Now, I've been involved in appeals where assessments have been challenged, sometimes, occasionally, successfully, but the process there is to look at the assessment and say where it is considered there is an error, a flaw. Now, if they've been carried out properly, you take that into account, but it's incumbent upon yourselves to say where the problem is. Now, I think I fully appreciate there's if you like, a lot of concern here because of this is what we think the situation could be from a layperson's point of view. But you then have to look at the assessments, and it's bringing the two together that obviously is difficult here. But I'm kind of trying not to stray into the specifics. From a general point of view, as members will always be aware, when you're considering these, I'm always asking you, well, have a look at the policy, what is the assessment, and where, to justify any position you may take, you have to say what the problem is.
Sorry, Councillor. Just hold for a second. We're losing the track here. Councillor Walters, you want to make a comment, but I'll hold back until we've got to sit down. We're ready for comments, if you don't mind. You've probably all seen there's a comment come through from Councillor Gray about a condition that would effectively negate Mr. Mcadam's liability for any noise from his kennels for future residents. Mr. Elliott, is there any comment there you could have on that part? You'll see it written on there.
I think that's an absolute. That is not something you're looking for an absolute in the future that certainly couldn't be given. You must again look at the assessment you're carrying out now. You're assessing the planning land use. You're looking at the assessments, and as Mr. Smith has already said, it's looking at the assessment and looking at the position as it is now. That's as much as I can say. There is no application, put it another way, in any other situation, it is not something, the planning authority is not providing any kind of limitation or exemption from liability. It's something that would need to be assessed under other legislation, such as public health, etc., for example, but we need to come back to what is a planning application assessed on planning use terms, based on what the information you have before you. Liability is a separate issue.
Fine, thank you very much. Could I just come in with a question, if I may? Obviously, we've had noise assessments done, which we're happy with. It's fine. We're not experts to query that. We've also had Mr. Wood come forward saying that he's prepared to consider some mitigation to help the situation. Given that we don't have all the details of that, I'll ask Mr. Smith, Mr. Elliott, would we be in a position to consider deferring the application pending more information from Mr. Wood about what he would be prepared to do? could I ask that?
Well, again, I think that's a matter perhaps between the applicant and Addy Kennels out with the planning system. So it may well be that the applicant is willing to work with Mr. Mcadam to give him increased levels of comfort. But the information we have is that there is no need for mitigation. So we should not be seeking mitigation for something that does not need to be mitigated. You know, the agent of change, again, I know I've mentioned this, there's an agent of change principle. So that the proponent of the development, so the applicant is required to demonstrate that they will not adversely impact on existing ongoing operations. They have done that.
Right.
So we are satisfied from the agent of change principle that the impact will not be adverse based on the assessments that's been undertaken. But if the applicant wants to do something notwithstanding there is no impact, then they can do that out with the planning system, and they can speak to Mr. Mcadam and decide what they want to do. We would then only become involved if the physical nature of what they wish to do is development which is not permitted and requires planning permission. And then we would have to assess whether or not those mitigating measures are appropriate relative to the approved layout in place.
Okay, Mr. Elliott, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Smith. I just wondered, Mr. Elliott, would a deferment be competent, or would it not be in this situation? So I just satisfy my own mind.
I'm not sure I can usefully add too much, Convener. Mr. Smith's given his answer. It's a matter for members, but if you're going to consider a deferral, it needs to be for a particular purpose.
Right. Okay. Okay. Fine. Okay. Councillor Waters, you want to come in on the point of order?
Yeah, just I have a lot of real, you know, and as many councillors do, have a lot of real concerns about this and the report, and we had the information that the environment and health reports kind of takes out the peaks and the troughs, and a lot of the real concern is the peaks, that when dogs start barking in the middle of the night, it will create complaints, and as far as information I've just been trying to look at and happily to be corrected, but the kennels license is a yearly license. Correct me if I'm wrong with that, but I believe so, and I have a real concern that part of this planning process is for us to protect the existing businesses there, and you know, we have a lot of concerns about the noise reports and the belief that could start raising complaints in the future with new residents in these houses, and the Mr. Mcadam's concerns.
So, Councillor, I think it's not with a point of order. You're making a comment now. I mean, we really need to draw this to a.
Yeah, I would like. I was hoping for a bit of a response to it rather than just give a comment without a response on how we protect an existing business that could potentially be at risk.
Let me query that. Let me query that with Mr. Smith and Mr. Elliott. Then if they want to come back on that.
Yeah, I mean, our position is we are protecting that existing business by having looked at the likely impacts in quite some detail, and that has satisfied the situation that no mitigation is required. So protection of that business has been considered through applying the agent and change principle and looking at how noise should be measured in relation to all the relevant planning controls, whether that be planning advice note 1/2011, which relates to planning and noise, or the associated technical advice note, which relates to assessment of noise. And what we've done is take all those parameters, applied them, reviewed the information that's been provided, and it's come to the conclusion that there is no need for mitigation. So they are protected in making this decision on the best information that we have available to us, which seems to be robust.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Smith. We're drifting into other areas about licensing here. I understand what Councillor Waters has said about a one-year license. If I may, just to satisfy his query, Mr. Elliott, the fact that, let's get this right, the fact that the planning have now agreed that his business is not affecting the the planning. He's protected effectively by the planning. We've said that the noise impact has mitigated the problem with him. He wouldn't have a problem with this, and if he wouldn't have a problem with his license because of noise, because we've already said in planning that he is mitigated because of the noise. Am I explaining myself right? We're drifting into another area, I know, but I'm just trying to satisfy Councillor Waters' concern about this 1-year license.
I think you're going into a different area.
Yes.
I can't really answer that because I think you really do have to address the planning merits. It's going too far to look into the licensing side. You really need to look at what the information before you. I appreciate the concerns, but it's simply there's too many things coming in here. You must keep yourself to the planning application and considering the assessment before you.
Fine. Thank you very much.
Vice Convener, could I maybe take us back to my point of order, which was asking for advice? And I'm trying to be helpful. I know we're making heavy weather of this, but it's important. I think the problem we have with some of us have with this is on the point of order, with the report from the experts, is that some of us simply don't agree. And I'll give you an example of where we don't agree. Is if you've got up to 26 dogs making noise at night, you're bound to hear them, given that they're in open kennels in nearby houses that are only 20 metres away. How the expert could possibly come up with a different conclusion is beyond my comprehension. And if I might be really cheeky and say that Mr. Smith raised an eyebrow to say that I think he understood the point that we were making, and I won't say any more than that. Mr. Elliott, through the Vice Convener, would it be competent for us to ask for another noise assessment given our concerns?
Mr. Elliott.
I think you would have. You have to ask yourself as to where that would take you, in the sense of what you're really saying is you're challenging that. We don't like that. So if you come up with another noise assessment, it would be carried out, say, for example, in the same methodology. So I'm not sure that's going to take you much further forward.
Not necessarily so. If whoever did it had the gumption to go and speak to Mr. Mcadam and carry it out with an environmental health officer, Mr. Mcadam there and themselves, right? Then we might have more faith in it. But some of us don't have that agreement. I'll take away the word faith, but we don't have that agreement with the conclusions on a common sense basis, Mr. Elliott. And there's a bit of common sense in this. Let's live in the real world, and therefore I'm asking if it's competent, because if we got another report that was done on these circumstances and it said the same thing or something similar, then I think we would not have anywhere else to go. But if it had raised other concerns and possible mitigation, I think we would have somewhere to go. So either it would be competent to request it, given the amount of concern that's been expressed by members. I want to get on with this, Colin, and just to come to some conclusion. So it's a kind of yes or no answer to that, I think.
Yeah. I'm not sure you can go to that level. You are opening yourself out to, and I'm not giving any indication as to whether this will happen. I don't know, but of course it would be open to the applicant to appeal a non-determination, and on the basis that they feel this is unnecessary, of course. But really, I think you should be keeping it much more black and white, in the sense of you have the information before you and you should be taking a decision on that. One of the other concerns, and it was mentioned earlier on, and I don't know the answer to this as to when that noise assessment might be done. That might be next May, because I heard a May being mentioned earlier on, and that's a considerable time away. So I think it's much more obvious for members to simply look at it and consider the position as it is. It's a matter for you. You can still defer, but it would be probably more likely you're deferring for further information on the noise position.
Right. And you've got me wrong, Colin. I was suggesting we approve the application subject to a further noise assessment being done. Not for a defer. Okay.
Right. Okay. Well, I think there would be a difficulty there, because if you're approving the application, those houses can be built. and therefore that situation that you consider might be a problem arises, and therefore any noise report, it would be very much retrospective. I'm not sure if Mr. Smith has a view, whether that could be done, but it would be retrospective to address, to kind of see whether any mitigation can be put in place after the event.
Mr. Smith, any comment?
I think, again, I would be quite clear on this. What we need to do is determine the application on the basis of the information that we have before us, and I accept that some people may not agree with that expert advice, but the indication and the advice from us as officers is that quite significant review of the situation in relation to noise and that associated to the impact on Addie Kennels has been undertaken, and that there is satisfaction that the situation would not result in adverse impact.
Thank you very much.
So the answer is no.
I think that is the answer, yes.
Well, I think, and again, Mr. Elliott can maybe comment, members are the decision-making body here. All that we would maybe urge them to do is to consider potential implications of any decision if the advice on that is that it's not necessary or is not competent. But I fully appreciate the concerns that are raised, and we have considered them, as I say, in quite some detail to reach the position that we are at now.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So we'll come back again. Members, obviously, we've had a chance to debate this fully. I don't want to stifle debate, obviously, but may I ask members, do we have a motion to come forward? I'll hang on a sec because my chat box is delayed, I'm afraid. Councillor Illingworth, you came first. So Councillor Illingworth, would you like to put the motion forward?
Yeah, I'd like to put the motion that we accept this proposal. I am not particularly concerned about the flooding. I think the flooding issues are being dealt with. I do share everybody else's concerns about the noise from Addie Kennels, but I do not think we've got the option to refuse this this proposal. So I will move this motion. I'd also like to say that I would suggest that it's in the developer's interests, if they want to sell these properties, to put in mitigation features even without a condition. So, but that's my motion, to accept the proposal and let it go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gray, you want to do a motion? Would you like to second that?
Yes, I will do. The dog thing is a real issue, but we have been given advice, and as Mr. Smith suggested, we should accept that advice, and I agree with that, because if we didn't accept that advice, it would fall on our hands at the end of the day, should something go wrong. That need not happen. We have been given advice, we are taking a decision on that advice, and those who offered that advice would take the responsibility, and I'm happy with that. Regarding the flooding, yeah, I wouldn't rule anything out flooding wise, and I mean that sincerely. But again, we've had mitigation measures in place. We can only deal with, again, the advice we are given, and the 600 millimetres above the level for the ground floors. I'm happy with that. That's making every reasonable effort. Too many steps into a house and you'd exclude many people from purchasing these houses. Anyway, so I won't say happy to approve, but I will second this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have any amendments?
Convener, I don't know what your chat box is doing. I don't have an amendment, but given the discussion that we've had, could we please ask the developer to get together with environmental health and Mr. Mcadam to have discussion out with this meeting on the the issues of noise emanating from the kennels, and we can only ask for that. We can't demand it, but I would suggest it would be a sensible thing to do.
I'll make the point. I think the points have been made to officers, and I'm sure they will comply with that and speak to Mr. Wood to see what they can do. Given the amendment, do we have any comments? Councillor James, you have a comment.
Thanks, convener. Sad.
You've muted yourself, Councillor James.
So sorry. Sad but not surprised is what I said. Remember, this application was actually refused by Perth and Kinross in the first instance and overturned by Scottish Government. There's quite a lot of wrongs here, but unfortunately it seems that we can't do a lot about them. I have serious concerns regarding Hunting Tower Hotel and Addy Kennels, because I can see it coming now. Like I said earlier, it's like buying a house next to an airport and then complaining about the noise of aircraft. I'll as councillor for this area, I will be supporting Mr. Mcadam if the complaints start coming in, as will I support the hotel. You know, we're pretty much bound, but like you say, not a lot we can do about it. But thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Barnacle, do you have a comment?
Yes, thanks, Vice Convener. I think I retain concerns about the flooding issue and about the noise issue. We had a kennels until quite recently, some distance away from the village in which I live, out in the countryside, certainly a lot more than 20 metres, and they made a lot of noise in wooden kennels. So I'm aware of this issue, and I suspect it could be realistically an issue going forward. What really concerns me is we're consistently told by legal services that we have to make a decision based on the report, and it becomes extremely difficult to in any way take issue with any comments in the report on the basis that they've been done by experts, when we have our own personal experience that this is not always foolproof. And it does beg the question, why do we have a development control committee when we're not supposed to legally be able to challenge a report's findings, is what I'm hearing. It has been made a lot more difficult. And for me, where an applicant is offering mitigation, the very least it should be is an informative to him to explore that. So that was my comment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and my comments actually follow on from the points that Councillor Barnacle have made. I do find it very frustrating that the situation that we find ourselves in this regard. I had considered amending the application to put in mitigation measures to the satisfaction of the planning authority, but the problem is it seems the planning authority are satisfied that there's nothing to mitigate, so that wouldn't really have worked. I do think it would have probably been disproportionate to refuse the application simply on these grounds, as frustrating as that is. I do think there are lots of examples that we've seen in recent years where actually the knowledge of the local community has been right rather than the assessments of experts. You know, that's no judgment on whether these assessments are being done as per the professional guidance, but perhaps that professional guidance is wrong. And I think that that's something that needs to be explored further, because we see too many instances of that. I do still have serious concerns about the flooding, but as Councillor James has already alluded to, despite that being one of the reasons for the council rejecting this development in principle a while ago, the Scottish Government have not conceded that as a valid grounds for not proceeding with the development. So I think again we're hamstrung in that regard, which was very disappointing but not surprising. So yes, not impressed, but we are where we are.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Waters, do you want to have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Convener. Just echoing what's really already been said, I've a lot of real concerns over the, protecting this business going forward. Future residents on this site will have rights to put comments in when the licenses come up for this for the kennels, and a real concern that the decisions and the discussions that have happened today will be written in history by that point. And the concern with the business and its ongoing, and as Mr. Mcadam said himself, he doesn't want to become a problem, and it is disappointing that the planning system has certainly not alleviated my concerns over that. I will echo previous comments and Councillor Wilson's request regarding finding a solution to that now going forward. Mr. Wood made comments earlier on about potential mitigation. That's just echoing Councillor Wilson that be explored fully, and that the planning department make that as easy as possible to implement. I don't know whether it would need a new planning application coming in or just an amendment to this one if an agreement was reached. But I do hope there is, to give some peace of mind, certainly to myself and I'm sure other councillors, but also to Mr. Mcadam as well.
Thank you. No further requests for comment. I understand all your comments, councillors, and to some extent echo those. And I do hope that Mr. Wood does follow through and speak to Mr. Mcadam. He did offer, and I hope that having heard this paper and the debate we've had, I sincerely hope he does get in touch with Mr. Mcadam and try and find some form of mutual solution to the problem. Thank you, members. That now passes that paper through as being approved. We're now moving on to paper 513. Now we're now sitting at just gone 12:35. Members, if you wish, I'm happy to have a 10-minute break for you to give eyes a rest. If you're happy with that, we'll have a short 10-minute recess. We'll come back at 12:45. Are members happy with that, or anybody object to that?
That's fine, Vice Convener.
Okay, fine. We'll have a break for 10 minutes. We'll reconvene just about 8 minutes. So we'll start at 12:45 just for a quick break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, members, I think by my clock we're back on at 12:45. I sincerely hope everybody's here. So we will, I think, move on now to the next application, which is number 513, paper 513. And this relates to the erection of 107 dwelling houses, garages and associated works, change of house types and revised designs, plots 1 to 79 and 87 to 114. This is at land southwest of Maple Place, Blairgowrie. And I'll ask Mr. Scott to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'll shortly take committee through some stills providing the context for the application and the overview of the proposals. Firstly, though, I just wanted to advise on an update for this item. I'll draw members' attention to page 82. That's reference to conditions 11 and 12. These conditions cross-reference proposed condition 12, which is an error. The reference should actually instead relate to condition 10. The terms of condition terms itself, which relate to the construction environment management plan, do remain unchanged though. I'll next now set the background and context and clarify the tensions of this application. The site forms part of Site 864, which is allocated in Local Development Plan 2 for residential development. Planning permission in principle was approved in 2014. Approval of matter specifying condition for the erection of 117 dwelling houses was approved in 2019. These permissions therefore establish the principle of development as being acceptable. Further to a change of developers, however, this current application seeks full planning permission now for less houses with a reduction of 3 compared to the 2019 approval for the whole site and to change the house designs across the site. The approved road and infrastructure layout remain largely consistent. This still confirms the location of the site to the southwest of Blairgowrie. To the north are the existing residential areas around Blackthorn Place and Maple Place. To the northwest is the Blairgowrie Community Campus, and to the west is the Blairgowrie Cemetery in the northern and southern area of the site. There is also off Hazelwood Road, a residential area. To the south and east are largely open fields with the Piggy Lane Recreational to the east, which is just visible on the still. Now taking you to the site location plan, this just confirms on an Ordnance Survey base the extent of the site, which is enclosed by the red line, which extends to an area of roughly 5.7 hectares. The land identified by the blue line formed part of the original approval of matter specified in conditions permission, but it now has a separate full planning permission for 7 dwelling houses as referred to in the report, so it doesn't form part of the current planning application. Moving now to the site layout plan. As noted earlier, the current proposal is modelled on the extant detailed approval, with the road layout retained as approved, with one key difference being the link from Elm Drive to Hazelwood Road in the southwest of the site, which is now included as part of the application. I'll show in details on that road in later stills. Similarly, in terms of open space, play area and the SUDs, these also replicate the previous approval to a large extent. The general layout and configuration of the site are therefore as previously approved. The difference in this proposal is for the change of house designs, given the change in developer. The proposal would reduce the overall number by 3, as I said, and in do so, changing the composition and style of this house sizes and size. So there's an increase in the number of smaller semi-detached and terrace properties to replace larger detached properties that were previously approved. I'll now show some stills to illustrate the proposed house designs and street elevations. This and the next, they'll show these street elevations of various points across the site. As noted in the report on paragraph 60, the material finishes include a mixture of wall materials with rendered material, grey cedral cladding, brick and reconstituted stone. In terms of the roof and windows, they're to be universal largely throughout the site in terms of concrete roof tile and dark grey windows. These elevations show a mixture of 2-storey houses in styles and sizes, proposed ranging to 3 and 4 bedroom detached and semi-detached properties, such as shown in the elevation D and F in the centre of this drawing, and terrace properties as shown in the street elevation C. Moving now to the second, this is just showing again further street elevations, which include further 2-storey properties, but also several single-storey properties such as elevation I and J in the centre of the drawing, which are largely located to the centre and eastern part of the site. I'm now going to take committee through some photographs. So in this still there are 2 photos. The photo on the left was taken from Elm Drive at the northern boundary of the site, with a view looking north towards the existing residential areas at Blackthorn and Maple Place. The Blairgowrie Community Campus is located off the shot to the left. Elm Drive, the road that's in the centre of the shot, would serve as the primary access to and through the proposed development. To the right of this shot is the site referenced earlier, which has planning permission for 7 dwelling houses, with development having commenced there. The photo on the right is a still which is taken further down Elm Drive, this time looking south and east over the development site itself. Again, it will be noted that development has commenced here under the extant permissions. That's for the installation of the road and the services. In the far left and centre is Piggy Lane, the recreational area, which would be accessed from the roads proposed in this application. In the far right distance are some existing residential properties, including Bree Lane, which is referred to in the report. Moving to the second set of photos, the left-hand shot on this still is now in the south of the site. This photo is looking towards Hazelwood Road. Committee will note the through access which is now provided from the site to Hazelwood Road has been formed, which will provide the second means of access and egress from the site, effectively connecting Hazelwood Road with the wider residential areas as a through road. This access is also being used for construction traffic at present. To the right, the second photo was taken from that southeast corner of the site at the approximate location of the SUDS basins looking north. This photo again shows the extent of development underway. To conclude, we're now back at the proposed site plan, and that's the conclusion of the stills, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Now, at the moment on my list, we have three deputations. The first was Miss McCourty, but I'm not sure if she's actually on the line. Is Miss McCourty there or not? If not, I'm happy to move to the next person on my list. Do we know if she's there? Obviously not.
As far as I'm aware, Vice Convener, she's Miss McCourty's not joined the meeting.
Fine. Okay, fine. Then the next person on my list was Dr. McCleary. Is Dr. McCleary there? I've a note there saying only the applicant's agent is with us.
Yeah, again, Vice Convener, I don't think Dr. McCleary's joined us.
Right, then we have, I think, Mr. Laird on the phone. Mr. Laird, are you there? The agent on behalf of the applicant. You are, Mr. Laird. Did you want to make a deputation?
Hello.
Hello. Are you happy to make a deputation?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Fine. Okay, then you'll have up to 10 minutes to do that. My colleague will be timing you, and if we get to the 9-minute mark, he will interrupt you and say you obviously have 1 minute left to go. So if you're happy with that, I'll hand it over to you, Mr. Laird.
Okay. Thank you very much, Convener.
Thank you.
Scotia Homes took over this site following the previous detailed approval, which was granted to Stuart Mcadam in 2019. And the intention, if granted, is to work in partnership with J.S. Brown to deliver the development. Since the submission of our planning application, we have worked closely with the Council's planning team to come up with a development which meets policy and which is satisfactory to them. The plans which we have submitted are broadly similar to the previous approval, although 1 or 2 minor changes have been made. The number of units has been reduced by 3 from 117 to 114, and we are proposing to form the link road between Elm Drive and Hazelwood Road much earlier in the development process. We've worked closely with the Council's landscape team and have modified the plans to include a larger number of native species of trees than were included in the previous proposals. And in terms of the play area which has been included, we have a useful dialogue with both the Council's community green space team and the wider community itself. And this has provided us with a good steer on the final plan, which will be submitted to satisfy the relevant planning condition in relation to the play area. We've worked closely with the Council's ecologist and have undertaken significant additional wildlife survey work, which has checked for protected species such as great crested newt, and no evidence of any of these have been found. And the development will include several wildlife friendly measures which go over and above those included in the previous scheme. They include bat and swift boxes, which will be integrated into the houses. The fences in the back gardens will be modified to ensure they do not present a barrier to hedgehogs. And we will also include wildlife friendly curbs along the roads. All of the houses will include solar panels to comply with the Council's environmental policies. And it's been agreed that we will also be installing a glass recycling point as part of the plans. The most recent work which has been carried out in relation to the application concerns drainage, and close dialogue has taken place between ourselves, our consulting engineers Fairhurst, and the Council's flood prevention team. The upshot of this has been an updated flood risk assessment, which was submitted last month and which has satisfied the concerns of the flood prevention team. We're aware that there have been some comments on this, but we're confident that the revised plans have been designed to address the concerns which have been raised. We would wish to stress that we've worked closely with the council to reach the point we are today, and the intention would be to continue to do so as we submit further information to purify planning conditions, and also in general terms as we work towards completion of the site. So thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Laird. I'll wait to see if any questions come through, but as I'm waiting, if I may ask one, then it comes back to the flooding situation again. As you've alluded to, there is a neighbour. We haven't got the map up at the moment, unfortunately, but it's a house that's just to the south of the site, which sits slightly lower. He has raised many concerns, as you know. Are we sure that we have taken sufficient measures to mitigate any potential flooding to his property, particularly, as we mentioned earlier today, the extreme flooding that we have seen recently, extreme amount of rain? Are we sure we've mitigated as best we can to avoid any flooding to his property?
We've been in pretty close contact with the owner of Brelade, and had quite regular meetings with him. So I think it's one of his main concerns relates to his septic tank and the operation of that during any flooding event. So we've made provision for connection of that to the main sewer system. Also, in more broad terms on flooding, we have made amendments to the surface water drainage arrangements to try and take on board his concerns as far as possible. And basically that's to include a sort of mini floodplain area to the north of the road that links to the Piggy Lane car park. And that is designed to hold any water and keep it away from the property at Brelade. So there have been detailed discussions with Gavin Bissett, who might be able to give him a little bit more information on this, but we've really tried our very best to do all we can to meet the owner of Brelade's concerns, and we will be just keeping in close dialogue with him as the development progresses. We're on reasonably good terms with him. So, but really want to make sure that the scheme is avoiding any sort of adverse impact on his property.
Fine. Thank you very much. As we've been talking, I haven't seen any questions coming through. So on that basis, Mr. Laird, thank you very much for your deputation this morning.
Okay, thank you, convener.
Thank you. So members, now we'll open up to questions to officers. Do we have any questions for officers, please, this morning? There's nothing coming through at the moment. If I may then just follow that through with Mr. Bissett regarding the flooding issues and the house that we can see at the bottom is Brillard. Are we ourselves satisfied that enough measures have been put in place to do what we can to avoid any flooding to his property? I don't know if Mr. Scott or Mr. Bissett probably answer that one, I think. If Mr. Bissett there.
Yep. Thank you, Vice Convener. Yep. Just to sort of summarise the issue, you see the property Brelade at the southern corner of the site that's sort of cut into the site. That's where the property that's previously been affected by flooding from the small channel that runs through the site. So this is an existing issue that we've been well aware of and made the developers well aware of, both through this application and previous applications for the site. One of the things to note is perhaps maintenance for the small channel is a contributing factor, and that's something that will be obviously addressed through this development and may help to reduce the risk. And Mr. Laird touched on it himself. They have designed in mitigation measures to further help reduce the risk, which shall hopefully improve things for the residents at Brelade. So a combination of further maintenance and additional mitigation that was addressed through the revised flood risk assessment has satisfied us to that extent. It's also important to note that the surface water drainage provision for the site doesn't connect into this this small channel, and therefore is is separate to it and therefore doesn't contribute to that issue. And that's also been approved under previous permissions for the site as well. I don't know if Jamie's got anything to add on that point.
Mr. Scott, would you like to add anything at all?
Yeah, just a minor matter. I agree with Mr. Bissett there that it's been looked at thoroughly, and essentially this is the third time that it's been reappraised, and we're carrying forward the recommendation conditions to ensure that there's no further adverse impact on the watercourse in terms of ecology and any silting which might contribute into flooding. That's condition 10, the Kemp that I referred to earlier. Condition 12 recommended would ensure that the surface water is appropriate during construction, which is often the most sensitive period for any potential surface water flood risk. So that's ensuring that that's in place. And ultimately, at a point where we have a completed development, it needs to comply with the recommended condition 13, which is seeking updated technical information to ensure that there is a satisfactory final solution for the surface water drainage, and it should be carried out in accordance. So we're extremely confident that this would ensure that there is no flood risk to any neighbouring properties.
Fine, thank you very much. And just Mr. Scott, if I could ask that, I can't see the plan very clearly. Where do we know where the play park itself is going to be? I can't see it on the map. Or have we not decided one?
Where you have Bree laid, if you move in a northerly direction, you'll see the bund, and then there's a basin. Then there's a green kind of oblong shape, which is a grass infiltration, which is part of the surface water drainage system, which has been added. There's then a dashed area, which is just to the north of that. So the road that continues to Piggy Lane, between the Suds and Piggy Lane, that's where the play park will go. That's a consistent location in terms of where it was with the extant permission as well. And as noted there by the applicant, there is a condition requiring the final detail of the play area to be provided. So it's co-located in the green and blue areas, which is kind of in terms of our placemaking guidance. It's got natural overlooking from a number of the properties in the locality, and it's obviously adjacent to the recreational area at Piggy's Lane. So people within the development and the wider community that are taking use of the facilities would have access immediately to that play area.
Right. Just to clarify a point, did you say it was adjacent to some water? Is that what you were saying?
No, it's not adjacent to water. No, so it's a grass swale, so it's not immediately adjacent to the water. It's just saying it's between the two Suds basins insofar as location, but no, it's not next to any open water and anything like that.
Well, I know that was something that local residents seemed to think was going to happen, but that's fine. You've clarified that. Fine. So I'll open it to questions. Councillor Wilson, you have a question.
A quick one, I'm pleased to say. Mr. Scott, will this mean that there's a direct link with the Perth Road? Traffic
Yes,
wise?
indeed it would. That's a long-term ambition of the local development plan for probably going on 20 years, which has been blocked at that point. It's now opened up in a temporary way, but it'll be permanent. So essentially it provides an alternative route from not just this development, but the Moynes Park and other developments at West Blairgowrie, indeed the primary schools and the high school as well. So it would actually help divert and move traffic around more smoothly in that part of Blairgowrie.
Thank you. I think I knew the answer to that, but it's a small hallelujah moment. Yeah.
Right, I haven't seen any more questions come through, so I'll just hold on for a couple of moments just in case. So members can have a motion, and Councillor James, you've come forward. Thank you very much.
I thought it would save you from doing all of them today again, Convener.
Well, I don't like to do. I can't keep doing all this work, so thank you very much.
Convener, as Councillor Wilson's just said there, the connection to the Perth Road is an absolute bonus, and it's been a long time coming. It also opens it up, like you say, to the new development going ahead for the shops across the road. So I'm more than happy to go with the officer's recommendation to allow this development to make haste. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody to second?
I'm more than happy to second the motion, Convener.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Do we have any amendment? No. And I'll open up therefore. Do we have any comments? No. So members, we've approved that report as well. So that paper's been approved. Thank you very much indeed. So we now come to the last item on the list this morning. This is paper 521. It's a change of use, alterations and extension from a formal telephone exchange to form coffee shop snack bar class 3. excuse me, and associated works. It's a former telephone exchange on Moncur Road, Inchture, Perth. And we have Mrs. Condiff, who's going to introduce the papers. And it's finally we've reached you, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'll now take members through a presentation of slides which show both plans and various photographic images to set the scene for this proposal. As stated, the application is for a change of use of the small existing former BT Exchange building with associated works to include 2 further buildings and an outdoor seated area and cycle parking. Next, yeah. This aerial photo shows the position of the very small site in the centre of Inchture with access taken from Moncur Road, which is a main road through Inchture. The site plan shows in more detail the existing location and layout of the site. The site, as you can see, is a small rectangular site around the existing modest building. The site measures approximately 200 square metres, with the existing building being just 14.2 square metres. On this layout, you can see the church to the west, that's on the upper part of the slide here, the car park to the north and green areas to both south and west. And the photos that will follow will show each of these areas in more detail. The site and floor plans show in greater detail the proposed layout for the site. The existing building will accommodate the prep and servery for the proposed business, with the new linked store building to the south. Beyond that, again to the south, there will be a new building to accommodate toilet facilities and a baby changing area. An outdoor seating area will be provided under a retractable canopy to the south of the site and an uncovered seating area to the west of the site in front of the servery area. An area for cycle parking is proposed to the north of the existing building between the building and the public footway. The 3D images provided by the applicant give a good impression of what is proposed. The top right image is perhaps the best to show each of the elements proposed, with a new tree being planted beside the proposed cycle parking area nearest Moncur Road. Then the existing refurbished building, the proposed new store, and finally the new building to provide the toilet and baby changing area. On this image, the proposed outdoor seating area is also clearly detailed, with a covered area to the south and an open area beside the servery, with a new planter to act as a substantial boundary to the adjacent vehicular access. We will now move to a series of photos which seek to show the context of the surroundings. This first photo is taken from the B953 Moncur Road and is taken looking eastwards towards the site, which is located beyond Inchture Church, a listed Category B building. At the end of the boundary of the church, there is a vehicular access, and immediately beyond is the location of the site proposed for development. This photo is taken from a position still on the B953 Moncur Road, but this time from the opposite direction, looking westwards. Again, you can see Inchture Church to get your bearings, but looking in this direction, you can now see the former BT Exchange building, which is proposed for conversion and redevelopment as a new coffee shop, snack bar with associated works, including the outdoor seating area. The existing bus turning area and car park is all located to the right of the screen. This photo is taken from the north side of Moncur Road and looks in a southerly direction towards the building in question. As shown on the layout in the earlier slide, the proposal involves the renovation of this existing building to form the prep and server area for the proposed business, with the bike racks in the area between this building and the public footpath to Moncur Road. And then the toilet facilities and outdoor seating area is located beyond the building to the south, and the next slide will show this area better. This final shot is taken from the southern end of the site, and the dilapidated state of the current building is clearly visible. This area to the south of the building, as I said on the previous slide, will house the toilet facilities and baby changing area to the east and an outdoor seating area to the west. On the layout plan, 6 tables are indicated, each accommodating 4 seats. Therefore, a total number of covers in this area being 24, with a further 3 tables, 12 covers, to the west of the prep and servery area, thereby creating a maximum of 36 covers on the site as a whole. That concludes the stills, and we're now back to the site layout plan. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Mrs. Conliffe. Before we go further, I need to apologise to Councillor Barnacle. I think you wanted to make a comment on the previous paper, but your request only flashed up as we'd started this one, so my apologies, Councillor Barnacle, on that one. Members, can we have any questions for officers on this particular paper? Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Well, it's not difficult from the last photograph to see a distinct improvement to that piece of land. A simple question, is cycling in that area a particularly common pastime?
Mrs. Conliffe?
Yes, there are a number of routes that it's part of the national cycle route that comes from the north and right through Dundee and towards Perth. So certainly it is for the kind of longer distance cyclists. But as you're aware, a lot of locals will be using bikes now, and it gives an ideal opportunity for them to park up here and go for a coffee. So I think we welcome the fact that there is a reasonable area for the cycle racks being provided in this application.
Thank you.
And Councillor Simpson, your question.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. I just a query about paragraph 43 on page 98, Vice Convener. And the second last sentence, which says any inconsiderate or unsafe parking from individuals is not a planning consideration. Now, whilst I understand that, I just wondered if that will not be reassuring for any neighbours. I just wondered what the status is of the car parking area on the other side of Moncur Road from the proposed development. And if we can get any advice on any off-road parking there may be. I realise Moncur Road's no longer a through road at that point, but I just wondered if we could get some idea of the status of the parking area on the other side of the road.
Mr. Salmon, you want to come in on that?
Yes, happy to come in. The car parking there is publicly accessible and is in the number of circa 21 spaces and could be used by customers of this proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Brock, you have a question.
I think it's just been answered partly, because I had noticed on it that the Institute Community Council actually had objected, and the reasoning was they highlighted the lack of parking and the road safety concerns. But obviously the parking's just been, you know, he's mentioned that. But what about the road safety concerns? What do we feel, is there any there that we should be concerned about?
Okay, Mr. Salmon.
Yep, hi. Road safety were consulted, and in terms of the likely traffic generation of this site, it is exceedingly low, particularly at peak times. You're looking at very, very, very low numbers, which would be almost hard to pick up on if traffic counts were to be done. So in terms of road safety impact, negligent in terms of traffic increase. The site is very accessible to the village of Inchture via walking, with the majority of it being within 10 minutes. And as previously mentioned, it is on a cycle route, so it is accessible by other means. And it's not anticipated that there would be an impact on road traffic safety.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not seeing any further questions coming through at the moment. I will hold on. And thankfully, Councillor James has come forward again with the motion. So, Councillor James.
And yet again, it looks like my colleague Willie Wilson is just slightly behind me for a change this time. This is a great idea. As Councillor Gray just said just now, it's going to improve this site. You know, what would normally be a tired old building that's going to fall into disrepair, somebody's actually taken the initiative to make a business out of it. The traffic concerns with a great big 21 place car park opposite really aren't a concern for me, and I wish the applicant well in his business venture. I'd like to propose we accept the officer's recommendation and allow this change of use, an alteration.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, did you want to second?
Very much so, and I'm happy to second this. I've been walking around this area since I was 5, Vice Convener, so I know it very well. And I'm quite proud to see this coming forward and quite proud to support it. It will be a great asset for the village. Tom Gray's absolutely right to ask about cycling. There are 2 routes. There's one from Dundee up to Perth and through Errol, and there's the other route over the hill up to Abernight and beyond to Strathmore. So a very popular cycling area, and there's a lot of folk in Stuart have got bikes and they can easily potter along here for a coffee or a soft drink or an ice cream. It will be a great asset to the village. Folk can come there when they're picking up their kids from the school or after they've dropped them off, because the school's just across the road. There are some lorries go past to Taylorsome and Curd, but the speeds are very slow because they're coming up the corner. The car parking's been taken care of, and I'm a wee bit vexed that some folk think, oh, that we need to find another use for this. The building's been there, to my certain knowledge, a bit like this and deteriorating for 20 or 30 years now. If somebody had some ideas about doing something about it, they should have stepped up to the plate by now. And I'm pleased to see this. Coffee shops are very welcome. There is a very well-run pub at the far end of the village, and I think it serves coffees as well, so they will have 2 facilities. It's a great asset for the village, and I'm sure will be well used, and it has my wholehearted support.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Reid, for offering to second, but I'm afraid nimble fingers beat you to it. Do we have any amendments? Doesn't appear we have. Councillor Barnacle, you have a comment. I've got you this time.
Thanks, Vice Convener. It's not really in connection with this application, which I'm totally in support of anyway. It was more the comment I was going to make previously, but I'm quite happy to leave that till the end of the meeting if somebody else wants to comment further.
Okay, I don't think anybody else is coming in at the moment. We'll just leave it for a second and I'll come back to you. So again, my apologies for missing it. It's just the system's a bit slow. I don't think anybody else is coming. So as we stand at the moment, members, we'll approve that paper, and we've approved number 521. Thank you very much. Councillor Barnacle, just go back to your comment then.
Yeah, it's just wanting to make a plea really to planning, if they're involved in discussions with developers in improving applications, particularly where there is an identified flood risk or potential flood risk. I'm not completely happy with the 600mm raised floor level as being totally adequate given recent experiences, and if we are to approve developments next to floodplains, I think it's a reasonable request to ask the planners to discuss with developers that ground floor accommodation in certain particular locations should not be living accommodation. It's done elsewhere. I can't see why it can't be done here, if necessary. And that was all the comment I wanted to make, and it was really in connection with the previous 2 papers, really.
Right. Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Councillor Barnacle, and that concludes our meeting this morning. It's been reasonably long. It's been well debated, particularly on the 512. I would like to thank all the members for your participation this morning. Thank you very much. And of course, my thanks to all the officers for their support and help with getting this meeting through this morning. So thank you all very much. I don't know how things will pan out on the next one, whether I should be convener or back to my usual job as vice convener and just timing everybody. But again, thank you all for your participation this morning. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.